Good evening. Welcome to tonight's Village Board work session. We have, as always, a very busy agenda. Before we move into the formal agenda items, I'd like to open it up to any other elected officials, any trustees who have any announcements or comments they'd like to share with the community.
I'll start. Omar here. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you. So first, I want to talk census, okay? So we have a 62.6% response rate in Ossining so far, and that's good compared to New York as a state, which has a 55.1% response rate, but we cannot become complacent because every single response we get is money for our community. So I encourage you, if you have not on this call yet done it, please complete your census. It is not too late. And more than anything, ensure that folks around you are. So one interesting thing that I saw recently about the census was that in New York City as a whole, the response rate is quite low. It's below 50%. And when you look at certain pockets, there are pockets that are doing quite well. One of them is Co-op City. And when they evaluated why is it that Co-op City has north of 70% response rate when the rest of New York City is in the 40s, what they saw was that Co-op City is a collection of cooperatives. Many people, called a city within a city, of tens of thousands of people that live in that area. And they have successfully been able to get those kinds of results because they have formed community throughout the years, right? They have a network that goes throughout the years. And when it comes to something like the census, they're able to activate that community. And so I want to activate the community we already have, but let the lesson be learned that the work starts now for the 2030 census, for us to really build the community ties that are going to help us to ensure a strong response rate now and 10 years from now. Number two, certainly want to put a plug in for my podcast, Omar Lopez Talks to the People. It's super important. Why? Because we have a number of folks that are running for a variety of offices that have come on the podcast to have some conversations. In terms of school board, you have Roger Bhattacharya and you have Greg Galiff who have come on the podcast. That Greg Galiff podcast is coming out tomorrow, so look out for that. We have Jeff Gasparo for Town Justice and Elijah Reichlin-Melnick for State Senate. So if you want to get to know the candidates a little bit better in a casual conversation where you can know what they stand for and where they come from, check out the podcast available on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and everywhere else. The last thing I'll say is that when you look at the updates that the Village, which has done a great job of putting out a lot of information, is putting out, when you look at what the town supervisor is putting out in her weekly message, we're at the point where there's so much content, there's so much for people to go through. And so one of the things that would be helpful for you to do, if you can hear the sound of my voice, then this message is for you, okay? You're not exempt. No one here is exempt. Look through these various resources, and one that you find particularly interesting or helpful, share it with someone. It could be an infographic about following the guidelines. It could be a FYI about a Zumba class that's going on, whatever it is, because there's so much information, it can be easy for people to lose things. And so if it's interesting to you, it could be interesting to someone you care about. Look at the resources we are sharing and share it with someone that you know. That's all I got.
Thank you, Omar. Very good information about Co-op City. That's interesting to hear that there's such a distinct enclave in New York that they've been able to be so successful, and hopefully we can replicate some of their success here in Ossining. All right, any other trustees with announcements or comments to make?
No, I'm good right now.
Rika, Manny, anything you want to update folks on? There's plenty going on, because I'll say a few things, but I wanted to give everybody else a shot first. Is Rika on, by the way?
Yeah, I am. I came on late. I keep going to I was in the wrong Zoom meeting.
We were trying, but I'm glad you.
No, I was on my iPad. I ended up in another Zoom meeting at work by accident rather than on this one. The only thing I wanted to remind people, and I'm sorry if someone else has said it already, is today I received my the mail for voting for the board, for the school board. Envelopes are pretty straightforward. I think there was just one little thing that was on Facebook regarding that there's a blank that says witness, and people got a little confused. You don't need a witness for this particular vote. Just put in your name, fill in the box, send it back in, and vote. I mean, the school piece, the school is a separate taxing entity, as many of you know, in the public, but it's super important part of the community to be very involved in what goes on in our schools and to vote. Your vote to get counted. That's important. There's also June 23rd is another election for primaries. Lots and lots of mail coming through, all sorts of stuff happening. Just please make sure, however you vote, to please vote, to fill out the forms, which is an application for a ballot, not actually a ballot, an application for a ballot so that you can then vote in whichever way you want. So I just encourage everyone in the community to do that. So those are two. Those are the two pieces that I wanted to mention. I did want to update. It's the board as a liaison, and I think we said we would use this time if there were any updates. Is that right, Mayor? Okay, I see you shaking your head and thumbs up. Ooh. So there are a couple of updates, and what I'd like to do is just say that we in the Rec Advisory Board, a few of us, along with Bill Garrison, the Superintendent of Parks and Rec, it was our turn to take, we do walk the parks, we walk the community center, and yesterday a few of us went and walked the waterfront, where we fortunately had a beautiful day, and where there's both a town and village park, and we walked the whole length and width. It looks great. We're making some recommendation. I believe this is the last of the parks, and then there's, as I said last time, there's going to be a write-up by the chairman who will then send it to both boards, town and village. This is one of those advisory boards that has both town and village and unincorporated represented, which is very lovely. I was happy to see lots of people out there yesterday afternoon and a beautiful day. I was sad to see how few had masks on, and that people have taken off the wrapping off the playground and the play sets in both parks. And there were lots of kids going one after the other. So that made me a little sad, but I was happy that everybody was out enjoying the weather. And I know it's going to be a huge challenge as we go forward into warmer days for people to keep distance, for people to keep masks on as it gets hotter. And the ice cream place, the folks were out there setting things up. Ice cream is going to be open. We think July. I was hoping for June, but it might be July, and because of permits and all that with the county, but I'm hoping that'll happen sooner rather than later. So we'll have a date for that soon. So that's it for me. My update from one of my boards and the elections.
Great. Any other trustees with announcements before I share a couple of things?
Yeah, Mayor, if
Hearing no one, I can't see everyone at the moment. So, oh, Manny, please.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's not an announcement. It's more like a thank you for everybody. You know, again, from to the staff level, to DPW, to OPD, to the fire department, to OBAC, to everybody that works on our village and town level for parks. You know how amazing job they have been doing through this time of critical times in our lives right now, but yet we keep serving our community. Nothing has changed on that end. You know, everything kind of has become in a normal way. You know, from my clerk's office, you know, the amazing job that they're doing there. You know, and as we go through phase 1 and eventually we're going to go to phase 2, you know, I just want to kind of piggyback what Rika mentioned. Is just the norm has become of people wearing a mask. You know, we teach our kids, we have to teach how do they do that, how do they, you know, it's tough nowadays with these warmer days. The school is almost over. I don't know what that means. Is school over? I mean, our kids are being home this whole time. So, you know, it's going to get tougher for parents with kids. So, but we just have to keep in mind that we're still in a pandemic mode. Yet numbers have gone down in our community, and numbers have gone down in the state. But we still have to keep that in mind, that we still have to wear a mask. We still have to be 6 feet apart from each other. We still have to, you know, maintain that distance and just, you know, and how to be a better person, and how to become a better neighbor to us, So, I just want to thank everybody on village government and village hall and all the departments that have done an amazing job. Treasurer's office, everybody from DPW to the water department. So thank you for everything that you guys have been doing for us. So that's pretty much it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Manny. So I have a couple of things I want to piggyback on what some of my colleagues said and clarify a couple of things, and I will add one very fun event that's coming up. And I'm really glad to hear that same important message again and again about making sure that we maintain social distance, and if you can't be 6 feet away from people, to be wearing a mask. Obviously, wash and sanitize your hands. We're all much more aware of that than I think we used to be. But it is upsetting when you see people that are putting themselves in a position where there's some place where they're definitely going to be within close proximity to a person and they're not wearing a mask. Please. It's terrific that we're in phase 1 and we're excited to get to phase 2. And the only thing that will slow down that process is if we start seeing spikes in the hospitalization rate and in the infection rate. And so we've been doing pretty well generally. In fact, I'll give you the latest numbers for today. We only have 2 more positive cases for today than we did yesterday, which is nothing compared to where we were. We've really done a good job at, as the governor says, grabbing that curve and pulling it down, and we have been maintaining it and keeping it at a rate that is below a 1-to-1 transmission rate, and we need to keep it in that range in order to keep enjoying things opening up. And I'm excited. I hope that when Bill Garrison comes on a little later, he can tell us about another fun activity that can be done with social distancing that is actually not related to phase 1, but it's one of the terrific ththings that we have here in Ossining, one of our amenities that people are going to be able to have another wonderful opportunity to get outdoors. The beaches in the county opened 2 beaches, including Croton Point Park right near us this past weekend. Their plan is to open it again this weekend, and then they're going to see if they want to have it open during the week going forward. So, everything is, let's see how it goes, and then maybe a little more baby step forward. We can reasonably have these types of socially distanced engagements where there are more of us in close proximity to each other if we're wearing masks, if we're doing all the things we know we need to do, staying 6 feet apart, or wearing a mask if you can't do that. So fingers crossed that everybody is accepting that is a continuing practice. And hopefully by the time we get to phase 2 and phase 3, we'll see even more widespread compliance. I did want to just clarify the elections. There's 2 elections happening in June. We don't even think of June as a month when people go and vote. One of them that's happening first, that's being counted first, and we'll have the results of first, presumably, is the school budget, the library budget, and the school board and the library board. There's a yes or no vote for each of those budgets, and it is a contested election for the school board members. There's 4 candidates for 3 seats. Everyone who is a registered voter and lives in the Ossining School District either has or will very soon receive an actual ballot in the mail, as Trustee Levin was referencing. It has nothing to do with your party affiliation. It's just you're a registered voter and you're in the School District of Ossining. The other election is just for registered Democrats, and that's happening a little bit later in June, but it's a 2-step process. What you got in the mail, if you're a registered Democrat, is an application for a ballot, and after you send in that application, then you'll get the actual ballot, and some people have already gotten to that stage. If you sent your application in right away, you may have already gotten your ballot, and that has several races from president to town justice and everything in between. So if you're a registered Democrat, you get to vote 2 times this month. What an exciting June for democracy. I did then want to invite everybody to join us for a virtual screening. It's been a little while since I've gotten to put my documentary and discussion series hat on. We canceled our April and our May screening that we would have been hosting, but we are going to be back in the virtual world having a screening this Friday evening. So check out the ossiningodocumentaries.org. It's being co-hosted with Sing Sing Kill Brewery. So their website also has all of the information, or either of their Facebook pages. And it's in partnership with Riverkeeper, one of our favorite local not-for-profits here in Ossining, and Scenic Hudson. And we're watching 2 documentary shorts made by John Bowermaster, who is a filmmaker we've had before. He does a lot of films about environmental issues right here in our area. And in the first one, he partnered with Riverkeeper, and with in the second one, he partnered with Scenic Hudson. And so a representative from each of those organizations is going to be on the panel, which will be moderated by the filmmaker, John Bowermaster. It starts at 6:30 this Friday, and I encourage you to register for it, and then it will be available for folks to tune in on social media if you're on Facebook while it's happening live. So we hope to have lots of folks enjoying that event, and we will be raising a glass of locally brewed beer that is in celebration of an environmental initiative that was brought to the brewery by someone that has to do with the spotted lanternfly, which is an invasive species that is starting to be seen in our area and will decimate the hops and vineyards throughout New York if it comes to us. So it's all a really environmentally themed evening. I hope to see some of you there. All right, let's move on with our very exciting agenda.
I have one announcement.
Yeah.
Can I make one announcement? So I just wanted to, sorry, I don't normally do announcements, but I wanted to make an announcement that starting this Tuesday at the food distribution in the morning at the community center, and every Tuesday going forward until we're probably not doing this anymore, that from 9 to 11, we have partnered with the school district and we'll be doing a book harvest. So if you have any books that are non-denominational that you would like to donate, you are welcome to do so. We'll have bins outside the rec center that Bill's team is going to be bringing them into the rec center. They will sit and be quarantined and not touched for 2 weeks. And then the school district will come take them, and then through whatever process they're going to be getting that out to the community through book bundles and requests that different parents may have for their children. So that's happening. So,
Jaime?
Yes?
What age group type books are we talking about? I have so many.
I would say not textbooks like school books, but anything. You know, everyone's interests are open. So, but the bin will not be sitting out. So it's only during 9 to 11 on Tuesdays at the community center that we'll be taking it. So, and because we have a whole process for collecting them, quarantining them, and then getting them to.
So I can just bring in a big box or something and just bring it over.
Well, I would say as long as it fits in the bin. If there's no room, then just make sure that they're in one of our bins. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Anything else before we turn it over to Karen? All right, Karen, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. First up is our treasurer and deputy treasurer. They will be talking about deferral of payment of penalties for unpaid water bills. And this, we had deferred penalties for unpaid water bills through June 5th. And Dale and Tom will be talking about extending this time due to COVID. We want to make sure people have the time to pay and are not penalized if they are paying late. So with that, I will turn it over to them.
Thank you, Village Manager. Good evening, Mayor and Village Board. On April 1st, the board had so kindly, which has been met with very, very, very much appreciative residents, that you extended the due date on any open balances that were on our accounts for collection as of March 6th, including any future billings forward, to not accrue penalties if paid by June 5th. And at the time that we met and discussed this, the board had inquired if this deferral could be extended if the board decided to do so. Since June 5th is now fastly approaching, we're bringing this back to the board to see if they would like to extend this due date forward. When I ran the numbers on this, I originally extending the due date to, instead of it being June 5th, to it being August 5th deferred without penalty. We would lose an additional 18,000 in water fund penalties that we would have earned, an additional 2,000 in sewer penalties that we would have, in essence, potentially earned if we kept the penalty structure in place till that point. What I was concerned with, you know, from the get-go was that this would impact our cash flow. And we would not know until we were further on in this process. But I'm happy to report that we're actually pretty much on par with last year's receivables for the same point in time, adding the 5% increase that occurred at the beginning of the year. We're almost down about 33,000 in receivables received from 19 to 20, but not material. And in this environment, I would say that's pretty darn fabulous. So just food for thought. Any questions?
It sounds like you're suggesting that maybe we could have a resolution on next week that would be amending the previous resolution. Next week we'll be meeting on June 3rd, so that would be in time for the June 5th. I guess anybody who was holding out until May 30th to pay their bill might, if it's a hardship for them, then they might cross their fingers and hope that we are all going to agree on June 3rd to extend it beyond the end of the week. I'm comfortable with that. Does anybody else have any other thoughts that we may not be considering about why we would want to do anything other than what's being proposed?
No, I'm okay with that. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Tom.
I agree.
Ditto.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Okay.
agree.
So Stuart, is it as simple as just having a resolution on for next week on June 3rd saying that the this will be extended until August, whatever date Dale said?
That's fine, no problem.
Great, thank you. Okay,
Thanks, Stuart.
look at that. One down. What's next, Karen?
Okay, next up, we also have our village treasurer and deputy treasurer up to discuss budget adjustments that are required for the HVAC work that we're going to start at the police department on Spring Street.
Yes, thank you, and I'll take this one. I know that Andy has been mentioning this when we've been talking about capital projects the past few months with the village board. And he had mentioned the VAV boxes, and that when the contractor had started the project, he did find that the VAV boxes did need to be replaced. We did receive a letter from the contractor who wrote that without the ability to moderate or close off the air volume to the VAV box zones, the system will not work properly, causing excessive energy use and temperature issues. It is recommended to replace all of the VAV boxes in order to have a fully functioning, energy efficient system and allow the system to operate as designed. They provided us with a proposal to replace the 32 VAV boxes at $44,365. But Andy said that there's $10,000 in the budget already that is not going to be needed for the temporary heating issues over the winter, since the project didn't begin during the winter. And so we're only asking for $34,365. And the request is for that amount to come from the general fund contingency account, which has an available balance of $300,000. So the action would be to present a budget modification to the village board at next week's legislative meeting to modify the general fund budget and transfer the $34,365 to the capital projects fund for this project so that the work can get underway.
Bob, I see you have your mic turned off. Did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I just have a question for Andy. With these new VAV boxes, I'm presuming that they're coming with new controls or set points or thermostats or what have you. Is that?
Yeah,
I mean,
yes,
I
it's a
would
whole new
imagine.
it's a whole new control system. It's all set points that will be back to the chief's office, and it'll be programmed. It just won't work correctly without it. The scope was not originally to change out the ductwork and to get involved with the VAV boxes. You know, these VAV boxes that were installed 20 years ago should have a shelf life of, 30, 35 years. But when they dived into it, I'm glad they found it now and not later. So, we're putting $290,000 into changing all the rooftop units for the heating and air conditioning and making sure that we have the right air changes. And without this, it wouldn't work sufficient. It would just be so.
No, yeah, I figured it would be part of the package. That's part of the 34,000, or was the
controls were originally in there. So okay. It's but it is, you're right. There are motors that get wired up and to the boxes and to the dampers themselves. And right. They dropped the price dramatically because I said, this is a change order. It's something that wasn't expected, and they did take a couple extra weeks to shop it around, and they were able to get the material cost down. The labor is what it is, but the labor was able to be dropped because they're actually going to do the labor in the shop. So like it'll all be pre-wired and ready to go and be installed. So it's not like done up in the ceiling while the police officers are working on the tech.
Yeah, they just put them in place and connect them.
Yep.
Okay, that's all I want to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other trustees have questions or comments about this project? I believe it's one that we did discuss in our discussion about the expenses that we anticipate through the end of the year. I appreciate everyone being here to update us on what we might anticipate for next week, assuming that there's no reason not to move forward. Anybody else with questions or comments on this? Great. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next week we'll have a resolution shifting the money around, identifying the bookkeeping that you're taking care of for us, right, Tom?
That's correct. Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Madam Manager, 2 down. What's next?
Okay, moving right along. So next up, as you know, we have been working on an event policy and actually establishing, codifying, taking the steps to codify a policy where we previously did not really have one. And a lot of it's due to the fact that we have more and more events, and while some of them have been put on hold right now, we are anticipating that when we are back in full force, we will have a robust schedule of events, and we want to make sure that we can accommodate them, that we can do so in a way that enhances the events and also provides benefits to all village residents. So with that, I would like to turn this over to Corporation Counsel Kahan and Bill Garrison, our Superintendent of Recreation and Parks. And they will be discussing about the establishment of a local law that codifies things we went over at the March 25th work session in terms of or establishing criteria for certain events, and also discussing recommended fees.
Karen, I think before you came on, the discussion was that Bill would do his departmental report before we got into special events.
Okay, so I'm sorry I missed that. Bill is also going to provide an update on our lots of stuff going on in recreation, parks and rec. So he will provide that update first. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. Maddi's going to help me out with some slides here. Good evening, Mayor and Board of Trustees.
Welcome.
Thank you. So you can go to the next slide. One of the things, the big thing that's on everyone's mind right now is about summer day camp. What we do know right now is, I made this slide yesterday, and it was 15 municipalities. It's closer to 20 now across Westchester have canceled their summer day camp programs. We've got no guidelines or directives from the state or from the Westchester County Health Department on this. We had hoped that when the governor was going to make a ruling on if summer school was going to happen in school or not, that he would also be making a recommendation on what was going to happen with summer camps. And he didn't. He just said that there would be no summer school in school, that'd be virtual only. During that same briefing, he also was asked by a reporter about about summer camp, and he stated that right now he would not send his child to summer camp this year. There are CDC guidelines out there for how to run a summer camp amidst this COVID crisis. And that design, it does not work with summer camp. There's, keeping 6 feet away, kids having masks, checking temperatures, monitoring health of the children is all part of their recommendations. We don't even know if the local county, Westchester County Health Department, is going to even issue camp operating permits. They keep telling us they don't know at this point. And the other thing is that it looks like our swimming pool, which is indoors, which is a huge part of our camp, would not be opening until some unforeseen future. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So we need to make a decision on the status of the Austin summer camp. Parents need to know. They are calling. They want to know if there's going to be camp. If they're not, they have to make other arrangements for childcare. We did have registration open for about 2 weeks before this crisis hit, and we did take in a revenue of around $130,000. So we would be needing to refund that if camp was to be canceled. Our plan is if we decide that camp is canceled, that the rec department is going to monitor all the CDC, state, and local guidelines and regulations and plan accordingly. So if at some point during the summer, there are regulations or guidelines where we can have activities and bring kids into programs, that we will do that. We think that what we can do is we have to kind of reinvent how we run summer camp. And there's an old summer playground model where you have at different parks and playgrounds within your community, you have different activities going on, and kids kind of would go to those. So you might have arts and crafts under a tent at Nelson Park, or you might have some type of nature thing down at the waterfront. So those are all things that we're discussing and planning. So you can go to the next slide there, please, Maddi. I guess, are there any questions about the camp before I move on to the youth bureau?
Yeah. So if the camp doesn't happen, you're going to refund the $130,000?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a COVID-related loss
well,
for this year, right?
The camp actually runs at a loss. So with the camp not running, we are actually saving about $86,000.
The camp runs at a loss every year?
Yes.
How much of a loss every year?
It's budgeted about $85,000. Okay,
so every year you lose 85,000. We lose, not lose, but we're down 85,000 every year. So you're actually saying that without having a camp, you're ahead 85,000, but you're not, because you still have to refund 130,000. Oh, actually, I get it. No, actually, yeah. I just realized. Yeah, so you basically up 80,000 by not running a camp.
Correct.
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
All right. Any other questions or comments regarding this camp? It's probably, it's obviously something that's never happened before. And as recreation professionals all over the county, we are totally struggling with this and trying to be optimistic. But Karen had asked me a while ago what was our drop date of when we needed to make a decision, and I had told her it would be the end of May, and here we are. Unfortunately, I was more optimistic about an opening, but that doesn't seem to be possible right now.
Okay, so basically no camp this summer. You might do some of the type of programming, but you don't know yet.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, I'll move on to just a quick update about the Youth Bureau. So really the next step here is to schedule a public hearing to start the process of passing a local law to create the Youth Bureau. So I know there's been some discussion amongst the board about public hearings and having them via Zoom or not via Zoom. So that's something I would like the board, if they could consider doing that and having a public hearing so that we can continue this process moving forward with the Youth Bureau. Next slide, James, or Maddi, I'm sorry. So we do have a program that we're going to be working with and trying to get up and going, and it would be a Youth Bureau type program. The goal is to develop a youth leadership program for middle and high school students. The content and structure and how this will run, again, will depend on state and local guidelines and what we can do. We're looking to hire a coordinator, and rec staff would work to support this program. And this is going to be funded, I believe we spoke about it before, it's funded through the Open Door grant. There's a $25,000 grant that the Open Door has that's going to be used to support Youth Bureau type of programming. So we're working with Alice Joslow and Suzanne from the library on developing this program. We are thinking we want to kind of push it out as far as we can into the summer so that we can have more of a possibility of having kids together in some concept of social distancing and probably being outdoors. But that's our goal. Is we don't see that this program can run virtually. It's nearly impossible to do this type of youth programming online. So we really hope that we can get this together and get this going during the summer at some point. Go to the next slide, please. So current recreation programming. Hopefully you've seen our Boredom Busters. They are a hit in Ossining, and I am extremely proud of the recreation staff with their creativity of putting this together and getting it out each week. By email, the activity goes out every morning, and we've had over 90 people tuning in for a live magic show. 100 people participated in our pet photo contest. Our weekly nature walk and education at Crowbucky Nature Preserve has had about 40 people coming in to the Facebook Live. And our family Zumba has over 30 people tuning in on Saturday mornings to engage in some movement. We're going to continue those Boredom Busters for the next 4 weeks. That will take us to the end of June. We are spending about $300 a week paying some instructors to run these programs for us. But we have the budget we can use from different areas to cover those costs. And we think it's important because we believe that it's got the community engaged. A lot of people are tuning into this and responding, so we want to keep that going. Next slide, please. So moving forward with summer programming. So we are, again, looking at planning outdoor fitness programs. We think we can run programs like stroller size in the parks, or yoga in the parks, or a pound class. We are going to continue some online virtual programs because those have been popular, but we will look to see what type of things we can do and possibly explore the options or the ideas of having revenue coming in so that we might charge for some of those programs. We're considering small special events with limited capacity and enforced social distancing. An example of this might be the acoustic night at Market Square, the jazz at the parks down at Henry Gordine, other activities like kayaking, nature programs, fishing, and outdoor art classes are some of our ideas that we think we can do where we limit capacity, limit attendance, and enforce social distancing. And for all these programs, we'll be utilizing recreation staff on site to try to facilitate these programs to occur. Next slide, please. Just a quick update about the parks. The parks are receiving a lot of use from passive recreation. The past couple weekends where we've had some nice weather, the parks are full of people. There are challenges, as Trustee Levin said earlier, and we noticed it in our park visit yesterday, of people social distancing and mask wearing. We have signage has been posted, and we have more signage that will be to help remind people to and encourage people to follow social distancing and mask wearing protocols. Our facilities remain closed, such as basketball courts and ball fields. But we have good news. Our tennis courts at Nelson Park will be opening this Friday. The permits will be available starting tomorrow. There are some guidelines that we need to follow. We're going to be taking reservations. So we will be opening up the tennis courts for those reservations. People are to play singles only, or family play, they can play doubles. We're going to only open 2 of the 4 courts so that people are spaced out from each other. So we'll open up the 2 end courts when there's 2 at a time playing, 2 court reservations. But that's good news, because it gives one more thing, the first thing really, that one of our facilities that we get open. And to add to that, we also did open the Ossining Community Garden last Friday at Cedar Lane Park. And we have about 46 people that are involved in that. And we have a similar process where people have to make reservations. We limit it to 8 plots at a time. So we are, and as things change, we're going to have to modify these rules and these guidelines, but it's a good start that we've got some stuff opening up. Next slide, please. So a couple things, if you haven't seen it yet, we installed a new fountain at Wishney Park, and it is amazing. And if you go by there at night in the evening, I believe from 7 to 9, there are lights that shine up on the fountain, which it makes it even look more spectacular. The middle photo is our Parks Department. As of last year, our Parks Department started doing the annual maintenance of the tennis courts rather than contracting that out, and that saves us a substantial amount of money each year. And our Parks guys did that last year, and tennis players came back and said that was the best that the courts had been in years. So they're even more experienced now from after having a year under their belts doing it. So we anticipate that our courts will be in good shape once again. The Sing Sing Kill, we've done a number of cleanups in there. Unfortunately, after every big rain we have, that gorge down through there gets a lot of garbage. The creek rises, it picks up all the garbage that's along the side and brings it down in there, and a lot of it gets trapped down in that gorge. So our parks guys get on the rubber boots and they climb right down in there, and they're in the water and cleaning that out. And we recently got almost all of the railing repaired from damages that occurred from trees falling on the rails. The repairs that we had were open repairs. We finally got those completed, but in the meantime, we had more damage. So there is still a little section of damage that we have ordered the parts for. So we anticipate, hopefully within the next 4 to 6 weeks, that we will have that rail completely fixed at this point. I think that's the last slide, right? I believe it is. Any questions?
Hey, Bill, how are you? Thank you, very, very informative. I just had a couple quick questions, I guess. And I know that Rika touched a little bit on the reimbursement of the $133,000 to our community members. I'm assuming the majority of that stuff was done online?
Yeah, there's about 110 of it is on credit card.
So how usually, because obviously if we have to mail checks, that's something that we'll have to be paying out. If you have to do a reimbursement through their credit card, how does that work? I guess that will be a question for Tom or Dale, maybe. You don't have to answer me. It could be an offline conversation, but that's something that I'd be curious to learn more about that. That's one question. Two, I sent out an email and I haven't seen any response. I know Karen, in regards to Henry Gordine Park, I was there a couple of weeks back, and there was some damage, not at the park itself, but around the park, underneath the bridge. I know it's not a responsibility right now, but do you know if those repairs were done? There was a couple of signage that were on the floor in front of the restaurant there. Is those being addressed? Do you know?
I've not seen anything change down there, so I will follow up on that, Manny.
Okay, because I sent pictures. Obviously, that was an email that I sent out, and
yeah, I know the village reached out to Harbor Square management, but I'll follow up on that.
Okay.
And to answer your question about the credit card reimbursement, we can do that right through the recreation department.
Okay.
So as long as the payment is within 90 days, the system allows us to refund that. I think it gives us a maximum amount of money, and maybe up to like $10,000 a day that we can do. So it may take us, 10 days to do the refunds, but we'll start doing that.
All right, that'd be great. Thank you. And the last question is, since that you mentioned that you open up all, like the tennis court and some of the other stuff, that who's enforcing all this? How do we know that they're keeping the distance between, or there's not people abusing, I'm not talking about tennis, I'm just talking about in general stuff, and with the parks and what is happening right now. Because even if you go to the Whitney Park, there's times that you see a lot of people walking around the pond, which is beautiful, by the way, but the distance between themselves and the enforcement, how are we going to be, or how do you thinking of you may be able to manage that, if anything?
Well, we're trying to do that through signage and encouraging people through signage. As far as the tennis courts and the community gardens, recreation staff is going to basically kind of check in with people there. And if we see that people are not following the guidelines that we've asked them to, we're going to remind them to do so. And if it continues to be a problem, then we would have to consider, closing that facility. So if we go over to the tennis courts and 2 people have reservations, yet they let other people in, there's all 4 courts are being used, we're going to have to go in there and talk to people about that. But I think the enforcement is the difficult thing, because you're right. Every place you go, you kind of see it. And some people are making that decision not to social distance or not to wear a mask. And it's difficult.
Sorry, what we're talking about, I was remembering one of the slides that you show. It was Market Square and it was jazz. And then you said that you're thinking of creating these additional programs and charge people. I guess me personally, I would like to hear more details on that, because that's something that we have never done. Usually what happens in Market Square with someone's playing music is free.
Trustee Quesada, I think that we're talking 2 separate things. The concerts would continue to be free. If we did other programs, whether it was like kayaking lessons or art lessons or something like that, there is a possibility those would fall under our regular, the way we do programs regularly. So there could be, we could consider charges for those based on the expenses associated with those programs.
Okay, so that will be a different topic of conversation, not at this point.
Yeah, we have to really see what we can do and then determine, how that would work. So.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I just have one question, as far as just to touch off of what Manny talked about with the refunds and the credit cards. Am I to presume that pretty much anywhere else when you use a credit card in the village, there's a service fee? Was there service fees charged to these people? And I would presume that they would be getting reimbursed that if there was a fee.
There was a fee. There is a fee. It's a 2.6%. Our refund policy, we don't refund that.
Okay. Yeah. If that's your policy, that's your policy. That's fine.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in because and either Dale or Tom or Stuart can clarify if I misstate anything. We're not allowed to give that fee away. We're a for-profit business can just eat the cost or whatever the convenience fee is for the online credit card usage, but we're not allowed to as a municipal government. It would be seen as a gift of public funds. So unfortunately, when they used their credit card earlier this spring, the credit card agency charged the fee, and we had to pass it along to the user. And the credit card agency isn't going to refund that fee because they performed the service. They let it go through. So it's one of those frustrating things that I don't see a workaround in this. Others with questions and comments before we move into the events? Because there was a lot in here, Bill. I see Rika has her microphone off.
Well, no, I have it on. Can you not hear me? Okay.
I can hear you.
I have a couple of questions. I didn't want to interrupt in the middle of the presentation. One was with the Youth Bureau and one is Sing Sing Kill. Yes, it was very detailed. Thank you for all of that. There's a lot going on. I'm sure it's exhausting to figure out summer camps, and I'm sure that's a huge disappointment both to staff and to the public, because people who have to work are now beginning to realize that this is a serious issue. It's not a luxury to have your kids in camp. It's a necessity for working families. So I'm sorry to hear that. I know you're going to try to come up with maybe some alternatives that could be helpful. So I got confused about the Youth Bureau. You had two different slides. So there's a Youth Bureau, and we have to pass legislation to have a Youth Bureau, which we've discussed. Well, I'm in definite support of. Great news. What was the second slide about a summer Youth Bureau program? How is that different from a Youth Bureau? And why would you use the money that Alice Joselo and company, I use her name, but it's not her personal money, obviously, when we talked about using that money for the Youth Bureau last we spoke. So I got a little lost there.
So Trustee Levin, this money is dedicated it needs to be spent in 2020. So this money is for programming, since we know that we will, and I think there's certain parameters of what it can be used for. So because we know that we're going to have, there are not going to be as many things for kids to do during the summer as there typically are. We employ a lot of kids through the camp, other opportunities. So the communities that care would like to use this money, because it's, again, the money's $25,000 for, I believe, 5 years for this year, to address the sort of lack of, they want to create leadership programming during this time. And because it likely won't be that we'll be able to have the Youth Bureau up and running, we want to make sure that the communities that cares wants to make sure that they expend these funds during the calendar year.
Yeah, it actually has to be spent by September.
That's a youth program. That's not a Youth Bureau.
It's a youth bureau type program. It would be a program that.
When we discussed the Youth Bureau, their participation was to help us with paying for the Youth Bureau. Now, because it's their money, I guess they can do what they want with it. But while I don't disagree with how it's being used, that's not. I always worry about shifting discussions, and this is a shifting discussion. We discuss one thing, we make decisions, and now in the slide presentation, it just took a little bit of a turn. It's not so much that I disagree with the turn. It's really not going towards a Youth Bureau. There's a grant, it has to be spent. I totally get that. There was discussion that it's going to go towards a Youth Bureau to help the public finance a Youth Bureau. Now it's actually because of the parameters. So basically, it's being used differently than what was discussed and what was publicly discussed. And it's a youth program. I don't know if it will grow. It sounds like a one-time program. No.
Just to be clear, the money is for youth leadership. The money that Open Door received. The money CTC would like to use, as Community Cares, that would like to use this grant to support the Youth Bureau. in the absence of having the Youth Bureau established, because we're not going to be able to do everything we need to do for that, probably it'll be close to September by the time we get everything up and running. Since the money needs to be spent, we're keeping the intent and sort of the integrity of the grant to support youth leadership activities. And while the official Youth Bureau will not be established, the money is being spent based on the intent that it will have when it continues to support the Youth Bureau once it's established. So it's really not a departure. It's just ability to basically get a little bit of a jump start on the type of programming that we will be doing once the Youth Bureau is up and running.
And who's going to be running it, you said, is the staff at the community center?
We'll be looking at it through staff right now and working with Communities That Cares to, and we're actually meeting with Alice in the near future to determine what that program would look like.
Okay.
I've been aware, and Rick, I know you had some other things to talk about, but while we're on this topic, I just want to chime in because this is a topic that's come up on the weekly community organizational Zooms, and it's a pot of money that at least for this year is going to be distributed among a few different entities that are doing youth programming between now and September, right? Maddi, I know you're always participating. I missed last week's. So I think the school is going to be using some of it. The library might be using some of it. Open Doors facilitate. So it's going to try and address the same intentions that the Youth Bureau will address when that's up and running. And it's obviously, as you stated before, Trustee Levin, the need to have programming for young people. The reasons, it's a long list of reasons, and this is one fortunate use for us to, an additional inflow of money for us to be able to provide some of that programming that we're well equipped to be able to provide under normal circumstances, and it sounds like there's some ideas of how we could do it under these very atypical circumstances. So thank you to Communities That Care for partnering with the village and so many other entities to help us achieve this goal that we have so many challenges to be able to do in a normal way. Rika, you had some other topics though you want to touch on?
I had one more. I had two topics. I got confused with the deck, and understandably. The second thing is Sing Sing Kill. So it was sort of brought to my attention that we've had a lot of damage from trees, and I mean there is garbage, sadly, that piles up, and it's a body of water, and that's what happens when it rains or whatever. The question I have, I don't know if it's a Stuart question, I don't know if it's a village manager question, the trees that seem to have branches and trees falling on the fencing that is breaking more often than I would have thought a fence would be broken and has to get repaired. And there seems to be a lot of it. Who owns those trees?
So, it depends. Those trees can be on private property in some places. In some places they may not be. There's a couple of challenges. Sometimes the pruning and trimming of the trees in that area is challenging for a variety of reasons, and thus somewhat expensive. So we have been looking into this. We have been looking into how we can work with property owners on it. So there's a sort of a myriad of issues that come up, and it's not always, unfortunately, it's not always necessarily dead trees. It's because of the,
right.
I think the erosion and everything else also creates a vulnerability there. We haven't reached the ideal solution. We are also looking at, how we can, other materials we might ultimately be able to start substituting for the fence that maybe don't damage as easily. There's a couple of things that we've talked about and looked at. I don't think this is something anybody anticipated. It's sort of just something that we're looking at different ways to address it.
Okay, ownership though of property has to be decided at some point. Who owns what and how that goes forward, because I'm just concerned. It's not a little bit here and there because of a storm, it's becoming like a problem. And for all of us that live on hills, trees both serve as a way of keeping the ground and the soil in place, so you don't just take them out or cut them down. on one hand. On the other hand, it's like the side of a cliff over there. It's not so easy to cut them, but somebody has to own them and be accountable for them. And it's like becoming a little bit of a problem. I like the idea of changing the material of the fence, although I am going to think it's really expensive to do that. It's a very long fence. It's a very long walkway. But if you're looking at it, that's all I can ask for. So I actually never asked that question when we first started this project. It was nice that we got rid of all the cars and refrigerators that piled up for 50 years there, and it was cleaned out, and kudos to all the people that did that. But now we have, you know, nature is a funny thing, right? And we now have to go to like step 2 on how to protect both the pedestrians and the property owners in the village, etc. Okay, so you're working on it. Sounds like you guys are on top of it, so I thank you for that. At some point, we're going to need an update about solutions for that.
Yeah, we are. We should be in a position to do that in the relatively near future. Again, it's you know, we can identify ownership. Then it's really even for village-owned property. It's not an easy job to get somebody who can deal with the problem. You know, we're looking at what is the most cost-effective and the most sustainable solution here, and we're weighing a couple of different options.
Thank you. We appreciate it. That's it for me. Thank you.
I believe Trustee Lopez had his virtual hand raised.
I did. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So first, thank you, Bill, for this great presentation. Always good to hear about the work that you and the team are doing. My first question is about the boredom busters. They're going to be over after the next 4 weeks. What happens after that?
So what we're hoping is that starting in July, that we will be able to implement some of these outdoor activities. So instead of doing pound virtually online, that we can do pound exercise or a Zumba class in a park somewhere. We hope that we'll be able to do some youth type of programming, if it might be like an arts and crafts for 10 kids under a pavilion at Ryder Park, for example. So we hope to be doing the type of things that we're doing with the boredom busters, but more kind of in person and out in our parks.
Thank you. You also said that 15 municipalities have canceled camp, but we have not. Why haven't we?
I think, well, that number has increased rapidly in the past week. We had, when the village manager had asked me what was our date that we needed to make a decision by, I had spoke with Bob Chesna, who is the rec supervisor who coordinates the camps. And we concluded that we could wait as long as to the end of May. And if we knew by then that camp was a go, it would be a challenge, but we could get it up and going. We'd have to hire nearly 100 people. We have to still put our orders in for t-shirts, arrange transportation. So we held off on all of that. But if camp was a go, we would have had to start doing that, you know, today.
So it's not a go.
It's not a go.
Right. So yeah, I guess that's where I'm confused. If it's not going to be a go, why not just say it's not a go?
So you know, we do want to we wanted to present this to the board. If there are really no other options, I don't believe. However, we did want to bring it for board discussion. The camp program is really important to Ossining. It serves a lot of purposes beyond just recreation. As parents go back to work, we were really hoping that we could reinvent it somehow in a more impactful way. And that literally, what's been going on in this changes day to day. And as we tracked it really over this past few days, we came to the conclusion that it would be almost impossible to run it based on the CDC guidelines that would be required. But I guess we did err on maybe being a little bit open-ended if the board wanted to discuss it further.
Yeah, I'll leave it to other folks to chime in. My feeling is, you know, just be clear about where we are. Just be honest about the fact that it's not going to happen.
Well, yeah, I mean,
right?
you know, it's not a matter of, you know, we look at different scenarios of how it can work. And again, the guidelines change almost daily. So we're about halfway. I think if we're 20 municipalities, that's less than half of the municipalities in Westchester have made this decision so far. So we, you know, again, you know, we didn't want to be in a position if something changed and we can run it, that we would run it. So, and to be honest, if things did change in a way that we can do something else, we are at the point now where it makes more sense though, because we're also dealing with people needing to be sure about what they're doing too, and being able to make other plans if camp's not available for childcare or other things. So we want to be able to now refund that money. I doubt that whatever we do could replicate camp, and whatever we do would have to be designed with a different fee structure and different timing. So again, we've been sort of walking you know, a fine line to that.
Yeah, no, I respect that, and I empathize with the position that you are in. The way that I see it, more than likely, like if you were to try to find something that could work, it would be something akin to what the library does with their kind of exploration kits, where you can get a Ziploc bag that has some activities in it and instructions, and you can hand those out once every couple of weeks or whatever the timing is, and folks can be doing it separately,
Right.
like that, something along those lines. But that still doesn't solve for how do you, the kids that you would usually hire, the teens to work at the camp, they're not going to be doing, you're not going to have that same need. You mentioned t-shirts and a bunch of other materials. And to me, one of the most important things is parents are in kind of planning what they're going to do with their children with respect to their own work as well. You know, at the end of the day, the parents are going to be with the kids.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. I empathize also with Victoria, who like two of these little guys. She's like, all right, so I gotta be a summer camp leader. So there you go. All right, well, that's all that I have. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is there anybody I haven't heard from yet? Any trustees that have any further questions or comments on the recap and the update? Then I'll just identify a couple of things that stood out to me. First of all, yay for the tennis courts. That's so exciting. I really appreciate that the staff took on the initiative last year to learn how to manage the clay courts and did so well, and is doing it again this year. Not only does that save us money, but I love it when we can be self-sufficient, and it's just a great, it's great for our staff to expand their skills and for us to be able to get them to take on that responsibility. And it feels like summer when you have tennis. I don't play tennis, but I'm happy that someone's going to be playing tennis on the Nelson courts. And I really hope that people that it's a simple process, and the people are able to follow the guidelines, and the people actually do follow the guidelines, because I could see that it would be difficult for someone who makes a reservation if somebody else shows up and says, hey, can I come in? And you have to say no, because I'd be jeopardizing my ability to ever come back again. And that is a tough situation, and we have a lot of tough conversations these days. So I appreciate the challenges that come with this from an enforcement perspective. And so I'm really optimistic and hopeful that it's able to continue in a really successful way, so that everyone that is participating appropriately and following the rules is able to keep enjoying the tennis courts through the season. I just wanted to understand, and I am one of those parents who depends on our camps as childcare for the summer, and I have appreciated it for many years, and I'm really enjoying a lot of quality time with my kids these days. And I guess I'm going to continue enjoying 24/7 quality time with my children forever, it seems. But maybe in September they'll go to school once in a while. I am much more fortunate than other people that I have this weird job that has flexibility, and that I do not have to go out and go to work. So I guess the best thing that we can do right now is to provide some sort of predictability for families that have to figure out childcare. And unfortunately, some people can't stay home with their kids, and they have a lot to figure out. And I appreciate that the village has always been so cognizant of the need to keep it affordable for families, and that's why it runs at a loss. Most camps make money. That's not our goal. Our goal is to provide safe, affordable programming that meets the needs of the people in our community and keeps the children in our community safe and keeps them from doing really stupid things and gives them an opportunity to make money if they're an adolescent. And we can't do any of that this year. And it's not for lack of trying. I do appreciate that the Recreation and Parks Department has been coming up with creative ways to provide what programming we can do in a safe and responsible way. And I imagine that will continue to increase as the season goes on and we have a clearer picture of what is allowed and what is working well. And the one thing I wanted to mention in regards to that is you talked about like a pound class could be done at Henry Gordon Park or something, or some park. And then that would be like normally that would have happened in the community center, but if we were doing it outdoors and we could give very clear guidelines of you stand over here and you stand way the heck over there and then you over there, and people were in a very regimented way. In fact, it might mean that we have more staff in that space than we normally would be to be keeping people, to keep enforcing the distance. But there will still be some people who, first of all, are really loving the online opportunities that we are and are taking advantage of programming that they may never have done before because maybe they can't leave their home that easily. Obviously, it's free right now, but if we have programming that might be paid in person, would we consider having that videotaped and having that happening live and let people pay to participate at home? They've had this introduction to it, they may really love it, and be able to do that online. Is that something that you figured out or you thought about?
We have thought
class, for example, that's an adult class, so it's different than if you're doing a kids thing.
Right. We're throwing around lots of those ideas. Thinking of maybe selling like a fitness pass, which would give you access to all fitness classes that are running, and you can decide if you want to stay home and do it that day or you're going to do it live at the park that day. So those are all ideas that we have right now. We'll come up with some ideas and we'll give them a try and we'll see what works.
And I guess along that would be I'd like to better understand if we're charging for the classes, is that just because we think that's the financially responsible thing to do as a village because we know we're going to be at such a loss of revenue and normally people would be paying for this? I just want to understand our philosophy. Sometimes you charge money because that's when people show up and appreciate it. Sometimes you charge money because you couldn't afford to do the program otherwise. Sometimes you don't charge money, you charge a nominal fee because your priority isn't about even related to the cost. Your priority is to give people something else, something healthy and something positive to be doing in the community and something safe. I'm thinking particularly of young people and even young adults. So has that been part of the consideration when you're thinking about how to charge, whether it's a fitness pass or an individual class or kids programming?
So the majority of the programs that we run in the community center are budgeted to at least break even. So when we do our budgets, we have to have some revenue coming in to offset some of our costs, and we have that budgeted every year. So the thought of charging for some of these online programs or in the park type of programs is basically following that same philosophy of if we can get the program covered, the cost of the instructor, for example, which is mainly the cost, if that can get covered or close to be covered, then again, it helps us with our budget and bringing in the revenue compared to our expenses. It's kind of always the age-old question when it comes to recreation, where what do you charge for and what do you don't charge for, and when you don't charge for something, how do you make that money up? There was a community in Florida that went totally free for all their programs. If we did that, that would cost the village $1.2 million.
The quality and range of programming that we can offer, if we're bringing in different, we may be able to do more programming if the costs are offset in some way. So there's you know, we're also looking, because we're getting so much activity online, and Jaime, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of these programs get over, you know, 10 or 15,000 looks. So even though the people who actually may participate are less, people are paying attention to what's going on.
Yes.
Yes.
You're absolutely actually it's more. So like this family Zumba that is getting, I guess, like 60 or 30 people, whatever it was that attended. I don't know the exact number. That we are getting an engagement of over 18,000. And that's by creating an event on Facebook, and the algorithm works that say like, Trustee Lopez, you know, says he's interested. Once he says he's interested, then anyone within like a certain area of it, because that's like sort of the specification for it, because it lists the rec center as the location, it sort of hits the people that he knows, and what happens is it constantly shows up in other people's feeds, and people are looking at it, they click on it, they want to see about it, and it's a residual opportunity for views. So what I do while he pushes those out on a daily basis, plus I think he does reminders as well, I do the event, and it goes out 2 days before, so that the events don't compete with each other through the feeds.
So one of the things that, because we're getting this play, like we want to really look at all these things and figure out how to extend this going beyond our COVID experience here too. So there may be a lot of different things that we can be doing, and there can be fee structures around that, and there can also be things that we can offer free virtually to the community as part of a package, or a community or a community center membership, or even beyond that, so that we engage more people to ultimately join when we have more in-person opportunities, and we're able to use our center again, and our pool and everything else. So it's been an interesting learning experience on community engagement, and a very successful one. So
okay, well, I think we delved into this a little more than we anticipated, Bill, when we were thinking at the beginning of the meeting. We'll do this before the events discussion. But I appreciate that you have so much going on, and that you're being so thoughtful, and hopefully we'll see some terrific innovative programming that's being offered in new and thoughtful ways to provide some great recreation for so many people in our community that maybe even weren't taking advantage of what we had to offer before. So thank you so much. Are there any other questions about this before we let Bill transition into talking about events? And I believe that Stuart's going to be a big part of that discussion as well. Okay, Karen, you already gave that nice introduction to it, Karen, when before we flipped the order, but I don't know if there's anything else to add.
So just to brief recap, we will now talk about our events policy, our proposed local law, and our proposed fee schedule.
I guess since others are muted, I'll start. Good evening, everyone. You received earlier today a copy of Proposed Local Law 8 of 2020. I should point out we're going to have a lot of public hearings coming up at some point, but we'll just sort of leave that. This is based in large part upon a great deal of work done by Jaime Hoffman and Bill Garrison, the guide that Jaime and Bill prepared, plus the comments that the board provided at the March 25th work session. What the proposed local law effectively does is create a new chapter of the code, which would be chapter 226, which would be entitled Special Events, Parades, and Public Gatherings. It would repeal the current chapter 186, which is parades, and it would also make a slight change to chapter 190, which is the Parks and Recreation chapter. That change would relate to the sale or offering of alcoholic beverages, which currently it says is in village parks with a permit to be granted by the Board of Trustees. What this special event local law does, and it's based in large part upon many other local laws that have been looked at, is it provides a purpose to start out, the basis for having the special events. And I also want to thank, by the way, our planning director, Jaime Martinez, who also went over the local law and provided some very helpful comments as well. There are various definitions in here. There is a definition of what a special event is. Lists a variety of matters, which is it's not an exclusive list. There are provisions in here for one of the things that was discussed at the March 25th session and was also in the documents prepared by Jaime and Bill, is to have essentially 3 different event levels, event level 1, 2, and 3, which primarily would be based upon number of attendees, and attendees would include performers, employees, obviously by folks who are just coming to the particular event. It would be 0 to 299, 299 to 499, and then 500 and greater. Some of those events will involve more than just the requirement that the Parks Department provides personnel. They may require other, as we define, support services. That could be DPW, that could be police, that could be fire. It could also involve OVAC. The way this is set up is that if an event is in event level 1, which is essentially 0 to 299, and only involves Parks and Recreation personnel, the Superintendent of Parks, upon having a completed application, and these applications, as Jaime reminded me, will be online, the Superintendent of Parks will be in the position to grant that particular application. For levels 2 and 3, those applications will go to a council which is called, I want to just, this is what they do in the city of Buffalo, so I do not claim any originality for it, a Special Events Advisory Council. The council consists of department heads or designees from from various departments within the village who would review those applications. And in addition, the fee structure, which is something Bill is going to go over and Jaime, I'm sure, will comment upon as well. There will be consideration by this, we'll call it the SEAC, as to whether or not the permits or the applications that come within levels 2 and 3 should be granted. Additionally, and I just want to mention this because it's a little different than what the proposed law says, but it goes back to a discussion that Jaime, Bill, and I had. Rather than have the Superintendent of Recreation and Parks be in a position where he will be denying a permit, if it's even in level 1, it will be worded in a way that any permit that either requires more than just Parks Department personnel, or in the opinion of the Recreation Superintendent, should go to the SEAC, should go to the SEAC. So the superintendent would be granting a permit in level 1, but he would not be denying the permit in level 1 and certainly not 2 or 3. If the permit in any of the levels is denied or conditions are placed upon that permit which are, let's say, not approved by the applicant would have a right to appeal to the Board of Trustees. The original plan was that an application in level 1 would be, I believe, 30 days before the event, level 2 would be 60 days before the event, and level 3 would be 90 days before the event. We may have to work on those days to sort of fit in what would happen if there is any review process. But the idea would be that the Special Events Advisory Council, which would be chaired by the village manager or her designee, would essentially meet fairly rapidly after the document is received. It is my view that determinations by the Special Events Advisory Committee would be subject to open meetings law. And as such, there would have to be a notice of a hearing. Does not mean that it has to be a public hearing, but you'd have to have notice of the meeting. And as Bill will go into the fees, there is one proviso with regard to the fees. If it is determined, once the event is proceeding, that there are additional expenses incurred by the village, let's say additional police officers than originally anticipated were needed, or additional DPW services, or additional rec services. At the conclusion of the event, an invoice will be provided to the event applicant or sponsor, and those invoices would have to be paid within 21 days. If not, the village could proceed in court to recoup those amounts. The local law also has its standard, penalty provisions in there. It does have provisions in here for circumstances where the permit, once granted, could either be amended, rescinded, or terminated. And that may depend, for example, if there is something which is occurring which is deemed detrimental to public health and safety. Let's assume a significant storm or something like that. The chief of police, fire chief, and there may be someone else in here, can actually terminate the event at that point. There are also circumstances where, let's assume that the applicant gets the permit but suddenly realizes instead of an anticipated crowd of, let's say, 350, they expect it's actually going to be 600. That's a significant change. It will require additional changes as well. It may require more manpower. It certainly would require more manpower. The applicants will be notified that they are still obligated to get all permits that are required by law. In the case of a tent that is more than 120 square feet, that would be a tent or a building permit through the building department. If they wish to sell alcohol or distribute alcohol, they will need the appropriate license from the state liquor authority. And this also then plays into the proposed amendment to Chapter 190, Section 4. Currently, only in village parks is an application or is a permit required for the sale or distribution of alcohol, and that permit would be granted by the Board of Trustees. It is suggested in this local law that the area which would require that the area be expanded from not just village parks to all village-owned property, which would include village streets, village, public plazas, and things like that. It would also allow the SEAC to grant that permit rather than the Board of Trustees. That way, if it's all being done at the same time, it's granted at that point. But the key is to expand it because currently there is no permit required for the sale or distribution of alcohol, for example, at the village fair. This would at least do that. What we will be, and I don't want to jump on Bill, but one thing will happen is the fee for the sale or distribution of alcohol that the village has charged would be removed from the fee schedule. But whatever fee is required by the state liquor authority, if there is such a fee, that obviously would still have to be paid because you're not otherwise exempt from that. The proposed local law, also provides, insurance requirements, which would be generally 1 million per occurrence and 3 million in the aggregate. If you are selling or distributing alcohol, you would have to have an additional $1 million policy. The village would have to be named as an additional insured. The event sponsor would be required to provide a hold harmless with an indemnification provision extending to the village. And that document plus the certificates of insurance would have to be provided at least 15 days before the scheduled event. For all vendors who would be selling food, we would obviously need names. We would need Westchester County license numbers. And of course, they would have to display their licenses at the time of the event. So that's in essence what this is. Just for some folks, if you're interested, the local law does include certain exceptions to the permit where special permits would not be required. That would include funeral processions, a regular sporting event held at facilities which are approved for those purposes, a student assemblage at any school chartered by New York State, and an assemblage for expressive activity. Expressive activity is a term that will be defined in the local law, and it is effectively, and I'll just give that to you, an assembly or gathering held for the purpose of exercising free speech protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution or Article 1, Section 8 of the New York State Constitution, which shall include conduct the sole or principal purpose of which is the expression, dissemination, or communication of opinions, views, or ideas, and for which no fee or donation is charged or required as a condition of participation in such assembly. It includes, by way of illustration, without limitation, press conferences, speeches, protests, and demonstrations. As I mentioned, such expressive activity is exempt from the permit requirement with the following proviso. If more than 50 people are expected to attend, the sponsor is to advise the village manager with a written notice at least 2 days in advance of the event, also noting the name, address, and contact information for the organizer, proposed route, and the date and time of the event. Other exceptions to the permit requirement would be events that are obviously sponsored in whole or in part by the village, gatherings for religious purposes held at facilities which are approved for the purposes. So to keep in mind, special event definition includes religious processions, but this exception is for events that are actually taking place on the property of the religious event. It also will not extend to weddings on a property owner's property or where a tenant has a lease, or family reunions. And finally, it will not apply to block parties, but there will be a minor fee for block parties that is anticipated. And with regard, the question comes up as to why weddings and family reunions, because it's private property. The definition of the special event includes where there would be the use of village support services that would otherwise not be necessary, and also includes closing of public streets. So if those type of events occur, they would be exempt, but that's why generally we're talking about public property, and that is a term that's defined, but there would be circumstances where even if it's on private property, you just want to make sure that the folks are where they don't need the permit, but there could be situations where you may have to close a road. In the case of block parties, while the block would be closed, the legislation would provide that there always must be provided a fire lane for sufficient access by fire and emergency personnel. The local law also would have the times by which block parties must conclude. And I had a discussion with the chief about this earlier, and it's our opinion that the times in here, which would be 9 p.m. for Sunday through Thursday and 10 p.m. on Friday and Saturday, is consistent with the village's noise ordinance set forth in chapter 178 of the code. Just as I look through the rest of this, there is a provision in here that there would be no advertising or distribution of flyers or brochures regarding the event until, in fact, the date and time of the event have been approved, so that people are not sort of sending things out. There is also a provision relating to banner permits, which would be a separate permit application submitted through the clerk's office. But those permits, it's important to note, will be granted on a first-come, first-served basis. So even if the particular event wants to have a banner, if someone else has put in for a banner prior thereto, that person may well get that permit. And I think I will, I'm just looking, I will stop at this point. There are, as I said, provisions for offenses. And finally, just as it's important, there is no, the issuance of the permit does not allow the permit holder to alter village land or property unless written approval is granted in advance. So that's the proposed local law. I'm happy to take questions now, or if you want to hear from Bill with regard to fees, please feel free.
I'm fine with listening to Bill first, unless somebody wants to specifically ask about what Stuart has brought up first before we get into Bill's insights. Okay, seeing no hands raised, we'll just hear from Bill, and then I'm sure there's gonna be lots of questions and comments on how we proceed. So Bill, welcome back again.
All right, thank you. Maddi, do you have that slide? Great, thank you. We can go to the second slide. So what I
Maddi,
did here,
can you enlarge the slide, please? I can't do it at my end. Can you zoom it out, please?
Yep, and we can go to the second slide.
The slide that's up
Yeah.
right now is the second slide, and that's the biggest it gets.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So what we have here is on the left-hand side are the current fees that are being charged for events that are occurring in Austin right now. So there is no application fee. We are proposing that there would be a $25 application fee. There is no event fee. We're proposing that there would be between a $200 to $700 event fee. That is based upon the number of people that your event, and that would include estimated participants, which would include your vendors, people who are attending, organizers, everyone who's going to be at that event would be included in that number. Village staff overtime costs, we currently do not charge for that. That would be covered in the event fee. Events on village streets or in parking lots or parking areas, there is no fee for that. We are proposing that when streets are used, that there would be an additional fee of $10 per parking spot of the event where the area is closing streets. Block parties, there is no current fee. We're looking to, they would have to apply, so there would be a $25 application fee. Parades, processions, and moving athletic events, which are like your 5Ks, those would be considered events and would also be looked upon to charge an event fee based upon the number of people. So really, in summary, is that there were really no charges. I skipped over the alcohol permit fees. Stuart had mentioned that currently there is a $250 alcohol permit fee when there is alcohol being served in a village park. We're recommending that to be no fee, and just the fees would be between that vendor and getting the appropriate licenses from the state. So other than the alcohol fee, there were no fees really being charged for events in any of our village parks or areas. So the proposed fees are there to try to recoup some of the village expenses that are being utilized for these events that are occurring. Questions regarding the fees?
Yeah, I'll jump in there real quick. Village staff overtime costs. You're saying that that's included in the event fee. So there's 500 plus people, you're saying, and you're charging $700. There is no way that you're covering the cost of police overtime, DPW overtime, and rec department overtime, where we're giving away the house, say, the village fair. I have a problem with that. And it's been the status quo for years, and the Chamber of Commerce has been getting away with it. And I just really have a problem with us not at least trying to recoup some of that money that the village is putting out. It's a lot. You know, your parades, event fee, 200 to 700. There's a procession that goes through. The church holds, I don't know how many processions. You know, I personally think there should be a limit on the processions that they're allowed to have per year. And you're also tying up pretty much the whole, at least 5 to 6 police vehicles on a procession. So, you know, other than the other things, they look fine. But I don't know how you're including village staff overtime costs that's included in the event fee. That you need to really explain that to me better than that. I don't see it.
So, Trustee Furchi, I'd like to answer that. The idea of the event fees, I mean, we're really going from nothing to something here. One of the things that, you know, if we were to totally recoup the cost for events, it would be obviously far more expensive. What we're trying to do,
I understand
you know,
that.
and so this is really just to offset, and we did do it based on analysis of what, you know, other communities charge and things like that. So there are events right now, even in the proposed law, if it's a village-sponsored event, there may not, you know, the fees are not necessarily associated with it. So Village Fair is currently considered a village-sponsored event. So those are things that we, you know, again, we're trying to put a framework where none previously existed, and we're doing it based on input from our stakeholders who do events as well as what other communities do. But you are absolutely correct. This in no way would recoup the cost of doing these events.
And I understand. I understand you're considering the village fair a village event, but the Chamber of Commerce is collecting money and renting out spots that are village property. And their answer to me is, well, that's our fundraiser. How, I guess this has been established and been the status quo that they can charge for village property. So if it's a village event or considered a village event, why isn't the village taking care of the fair?
I believe, and the contract with the Chamber of Commerce predates my tenure with the village, that essentially the village, the chamber, the way it was set up was that the chamber basically executes the village fair. I think that one of the things that we can do too, and some of the larger events, especially in light of what's going on right now, in the at least short-term, events would have to run much differently. We may want to look at our contracts with existing event providers. We have spoken with chamber members, and we have told them some of the issues and concerns. During our stakeholder meeting, there were business owners on Main Street who shared their concerns over street fairs, just generally speaking, and what works and what doesn't for them. So we're hoping through this to be able to have discussions that maybe we start doing these things a bit differently.
Okay, so one more quick question. Either you or Bill could answer. So I'm going to presume that the village fair is going to be a $700 fee according to this. Now, are they going to get hit for every parking spot too? $10 a spot?
Yes, that's what we're proposing.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Are people okay with us going back to where we can see everybody's face? Did everybody get a good look at what the proposed fee structure is? We also have the by email if we need to reference it. Okay, Maddi, I think you're the one with all the power. Thank you. Okay. All right, there's everyone. I'm sure people have some other comments. Oh, Rika, you are unmuted, so I think that's probably you.
I was going to go after Bob, so I
think Bob's good. There you go. No. I mean, unmute yourself, please. Okay, please. I was thinking you must be next.
Yeah, no, I was actually going to ask Bob what he thought it should be, because I agree with Bob. This idea that it says it's paying for overtime, it's paying a little bit, and it shouldn't be listed that way, because that's not actually what it's doing. It's helping. It's better than zero, I guess. So I have a macro question is enforcement. So a lot of this is written about fees. So I actually think people need to leave a significant deposit or escrow when they run some of these events, because it's really hard to go after people after the fact. And from our experience, and the reason we're even having this conversation is when organizations subcontract. I'm going to append to Bob's conversation where it doesn't matter which organization, to others, making sure that everybody has their permits, making sure that it's all done. And when they don't, I remember being at a different town in Westchester where I actually witnessed where the police asked a vendor in a very lovely, very large truck to leave. They had to move people out of the way. It was like really messy. But the whole idea was that they actually enforced their policy of saying, you don't have a permit, we're closing you down, leave this event. We don't really do that. And it was, by the way, really messy. But what it brought to light for me is in this legislation, because that's what we're talking about, we end up talking about money, but it's actually not money that we're discussing. We're just discussing an entire reorganization of the way we do something. That's a big part of this conversation. It manifests itself in fees. But it seems to me two things are clear. What is the enforcement? So deposits are a great enforcement. Private industry does that a lot, because if you have a deposit and you messed up the place, or you left garbage behind, or you didn't abide by whatever the policy and the rules are, whether you are the person who signed up the contract or you're a subcontractor, you're somebody who made a deal with a third party, it's better to have an escrow account. So I'd be really in favor of a major deposit that people get back if they clean up and everything's great and there were no problems, and the village keeps the money and draws down in an escrow, so it doesn't have to. I don't believe in going to court with small business environments and event managers. Like, we need to avoid actually all that activity. So I'd rather embed something like that. I'd rather think a little more clearly about enforcement of rules. And I got to tell you, honestly, I'm not sure village events should be exempt from any of this. I don't see why it should. If it's a village-sponsored event, it's the same sort of rules. Maybe there's a rule that the village can't pay itself is the problem. But a lot of organizations sort of ask us to be sponsors, in fact, to get around participating. And for those that can't do that, or don't realize they should do that, they sort of get left behind. I don't have a solution, but I would really like the village manager, Stuart, etc. I'm not sure that village events, because really what is a village event? Many of these events serve a public purpose. Many of these non-for-profits are mission-driven. So that, I think I would like that rethought, and I'm not giving an answer now because I don't have one, but I'd like to rethink that. And the number 3 piece of this, I'm trying to figure out how to say it correctly. The sizing of all this under this number of people and that number of people, again, very difficult to enforce, and very difficult to separate the parks and the streets out. So Bill and I were down by the waterfront, and we were sort of thinking, you can't just rent out an entire place because other people want to use it. So that's not in here either, because what we're discussing is fees, and fees don't get to the heart and soul of who makes the decisions about where events take place and who gets to the event. So if somebody wants to have it on the exact same Saturday of September, who's making the decision? So you guys came up, the staff came up with this. I sort of heard tribunal, I heard a committee. Who's appointing these committee members who are now getting to decide all of this stuff? I didn't hear very much about that, and maybe I should read it more carefully. But is this yet another advisory committee with appointed members of the public? No, you're shaking your head going no.
No.
No, it's listed. It's staff members.
So
it's only no, I got the staff members. I assumed there was also members of the public. It's only staff members, department heads.
Yeah, so some of these things, actually, there is a format for renting space that the town uses in their parks. And it does work for renting parts of the park or renting even the entire park. And pavilions and things like that. We don't use it as much because we don't typically tend to have a lot of village events in parks. I will say one thing about the village's sponsored events. We actually thought about this a lot. There are some events that are truly municipal events. Other ones may fall into a bit of a different area, but when you're talking about the Memorial Day Parade or the Fireman's Parade, those are truly municipal events. I think that, so there are some things that do really qualify and I think fall outside of the intent of this. The issues of nonprofits or even private sector organizations doing an event does cast a different light. While they all, we want to agree that an events really, we should be making sure that they meet certain criteria too. But they all provide community benefits, but it really becomes an issue of appropriate use of government funds, which in many cases in some communities that does tend to be a gray area. So again, our fees are in line with a lot of communities that are the size of Ossining, but the number of events made it harder and harder to make that determination. So I agree that being very, very specific or not having sponsored events is definitely a consideration because it helps make sure that we're doing everything equally. And I think that was the issue before of not doing that.
It's about equitable treatment, I think.
And I think people were comfortable.
The focus of the conversation.
Exactly. And when we did the stakeholder groups, when we talked to them individually and even as a group, I don't think people had so much of an issue when it was explained, how much village resources go, what the intent was, what other communities do. I don't think people had an issue with any of that as much as they may have had an issue in previously where it seemed that certain groups had one set of rules and certain had another. And that really is what was causing most of the issues.
Right. So, okay, so that's in line with my thought, and you're right about the parades. The July 4th piece where you then have private trucks with food becomes like a hybrid, but these can all be worked out. These are not big issues. What we should mention, however, is when Jaime did her analysis, we talk about we're pretty much the same as others, but we do have to mention and publicly that actually in Westchester and many communities, a lot of these events have been cut out, that they don't do the July 4th. They are very expensive, as Trustee Fritchie pointed out, that these do not cover very much, to be honest with you. They're more of a, like, you have to care about what you're doing and understand that you're still getting something from the public, and you have to sort of do this the right way. So I think it's really admirable. I would just ask, and I'm going to leave it at this, not for an answer, but for a thought, or maybe you've thought about it. There must be a right size to all of this. So Manhattan actually has a limit to the number of events that they run on weekends. It runs on every single, there are 10 avenues. They only do it on one day of the weekend, not on both. And they book it well in advance, but it is Manhattan. It's a different animal. But they have a right size concept, which means this is the maximum number of X that we do in a summer and in the fall. It's not sort of first come, first serve. It's not as many as people come for it. Have you thought about what the right number is for the summer or for the year, or was that just too overwhelming? I'm asking the village manager. I don't think it's a legal issue.
I think that in certain contexts, we did discuss some of these things. We didn't feel at the time of doing this that we necessarily, I can't say that's a lens we necessarily used on this. I think it is a valid point. I do think we have more and more events. If events are permitted in the fall, I think we're going to have a challenge. There's going to be a very short window to do the events that are now backlogged. And we're already having issues where people are trying to identify dates and everybody wants the same date. So, and that's a bit of an unusual circumstances. circumstance. So as more and more groups want to do events, I think that is an astute comment. It is probably something we should be looking forward on.
Yeah. And I would X out this summer because it's an aberration. But in general, right sizing would be, and I believe the county does that too. It rents some of its areas specifically with a ceiling. It doesn't do first come first serve and as many as people ask for. So, and I think that's going to be a huge challenge for you guys. Not an enviable position. Saying no to people is really, really tough. But I thank you. I think there's a lot of stuff that went through, and it was a very long document that was sent that we have to read. But it's a Herculean feat, Karen. You know that. People have talked about doing this for years. It's great that you guys stepped up in the staff because it's a big deal. So thank you. That's it for me.
All right, who's next? I didn't see if any hands virtually went up, but I'm sure that there are more questions and comments. Okay, there's a hand. There's a physical hand in front of the camera. All right, Omar, you're up.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
It says you're not muted, but we're still not hearing you.
If you're on like a phone or an iPad, you might have muted from there.
How is this?
There you go. Now we hear you.
Oh man, I gotta repeat all that. It was so good to you, Jeff. Okay, so thank you to Bill, thank you to Karen, thank you to Stuart for putting all this together. My first question is about the SEAC. Can you talk a little bit about the, is that an ad hoc kind of situation, or do you come together at a regular interval?
So
when applications come in.
Right.
Got it. So building on that, applications, depending on the level of the event, need to be, this is one of like the rare times that the words in Spanish are coming to me, but the words that I'm like, what is entregar? Like you have to hand in the application by a certain date, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it is. For recurring events, if, for example, you know that the fair or the bazaar or the whatever happens like the third weekend of April, blah, 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 can organizations put in one application and say, this is what we want to do every year, or do they have to reapply every year?
I don't know if we've had that internal discussion yet, but my own view is you might want to at least have some type of reapplication. You want to certainly make sure that the insurance is up to date, have a current hold harmless agreement. And it's possible, Trustee Lopez, that some of the, particularly the food vendors may change, so you want to make sure everyone is licensed. While the process may change slightly if you have someone who is on a recurring basis, I would favor having at least some sort of application on an annual basis that could be then viewed and deemed complete. If that had to go to the Special Events Advisory Committee, it would be my recommendation, or my thought that probably would go through pretty easily because they've already granted it in, presumably granted it in the past. But you would want to have some sort of application, much of which may be what was in the year before, but there would be some documents that would change.
Got it.
Stuart, the hold harmless in the insurance is usually only dated for the day of the event, correct?
It would be for that event, that's correct.
But that date.
As in many cases with the certificate of insurance.
Right, same thing, and the hold harmless, all that. That's you reach out to insurance, they send it in. It's what's the date? That's the date, and if next year's a new date, then you need a new one for next year.
Correct.
Okay.
Got it. And this may be too in the weeds, but when you think about events that are potentially conflicting, how do you think about which one would go in a specific weekend? Would it be the larger events events that meet the kind of village aims, or like how are you currently thinking about that?
So right now, we have events that run basically the same weekend every year, and we honor that right now. I think for those events that are very well established, some have been going on for decades, we would continue to do that. If in some cases, depending on the size and the nature of events, you could have multiple events at different venues. We would like to see use more of our parks for certain events instead of taking up, parking spaces and interrupting business on weekends, which has come up several times for the business owners as Main Street becomes more populated with businesses. So again, some of these things we'll have to incorporate or work out through the process. But right now, to a certain extent, and I want to acknowledge Trustee Levin's comment about having a ceiling. Right now, it is sort of a first come, first serve with established events maintaining their dates. We honor those and certainly give them right of first refusal right now. If we were to have more events, and it has come up, we haven't had an issue with it yet. Usually there's other alternatives, but it is something, I think those are things that we need to think of in terms of how we approach that and how we make sure that we're not inundating ourselves, even as we're recouping costs, that we're not overextending either, so.
Got it. Does movie filming play into this at all? Because often with movie filming, you're shutting down streets. I see nodding. It's a separate thing.
That's a separate thing, and those fees are well established. That's a completely different process. But that actually is pretty well codified and is operating well for us right now.
Good. Thank you. We need them to submit a plan or at least some thoughts about how they would get rid of garbage, but we don't currently require them to recycle. Is that right?
Actually, some of the events, not necessarily mandating recycling, but a lot of the events are recycling. We've run some sort of waste-free events, as well as there has been requests for recycling, and in some cases that has been the cost associated with that has been taken care of by the event sponsors, the event producers.
Got it. The last question I have is about the ranges. My sense is that over time you'll be able to get a better sense of this, but somebody pays $200 because they expect 180 people to show up for their event and 300 people show up. Would we charge them another $300 because now it's now getting into the middle range, or would we say like, well, basically like that's it?
So I think that's, one of the things that the law provides is if an event, for whatever reason, goes above and beyond what was expected, then the village does have the opportunity to recoup those costs. So if the additional 150 people or whatever it was necessitated more staff, police, if there were any other issues that regarded more resources from the village, then that would be part of the event contract. They would know that they would have to pay. And if we did go to an escrow situation, then it could also be deducted from the escrow.
Got it. Okay. Similarly, if you pay $700 because you expect 800 people to be there, then it gets rained out and 40 people show up, do you get a refund?
I think that usually the case is no. I think that depending on what the circumstances are, we'd have to, that again, I think sometimes there is a level of discretion. If we know that a major hurricane's coming, there may be more opportunities. It depends on what costs were committed and what costs were actually used that day, I think would be also a barometer of what would be reasonable in the situation.
Got it. My last question is about waiving fees, what are the circumstances under which you would waive fees?
I would strongly recommend not waiving fees. The mayor is shaking her head, but I would
I just want to
strongly
know if over my muted button you could hear me laughing. That's all I want to know.
waiving fees has I feel that waiving fees was a little bit what really forced this issue. And if there is, we do waive fees because then I think there has to be a really objective criteria and process for that that's not dependent on one person. I think that, again, waiving fees in the past has been perceived to be arbitrary or that people were somehow favored over other people. So if there was need to waive fees, it's better be a good one.
Right. That makes sense. And that's why I ask, because I can imagine a situation where it's like, hey, I have, 8 processions during the year. They're over 500 people, most of them. How about we come up with a package deal instead of 700? It works out to be about 500 because I'm doing a bunch of them. Can we do a package deal? Something like that would not fly. Is that right?
It would be hard to make that fly because the reality is this isn't based on an economy of scale. It's based on the resources, and the more things you do, the more resources it takes. So it's a difficult argument to make if you're bundling. So I think that that's part of the challenge. There has to be a recognition of what it takes for a community to shut down streets, what it means for the businesses in that community to shut down streets, what it means for traffic, what it means for all these things. And while we know we have some really wonderful processions, parades, and things that we enjoy every year, there is another side of this, and really that's what we're looking to address. So make sure that as we enjoy these events, the events don't have many unintended negative impacts to community or businesses, and that again, the village costs associated with these are recouped in some fashion.
Muchas gracias. I'm done.
I just want to ask a question that came up based on Omar's questions, Karen. Again, don't need an immediate answer, just food for thought. A lot of organizations put rain dates on. So when they do a rain date, I just don't know how you quantify for that, because I understand why they would do it, obviously. So something to think about is how do you include that as part of your strategy. I mean, they're blocking off 2 dates, understandably, because of the weather, right? But then how does that work? Do they pay a certain fee for that? And so no answer required. I'm just saying I didn't hear that as part of the conversation. I was just wondering.
It's a good point.
I don't know if that was discussed. That's one thing. And the other thing is there is an expectation that the more the merrier. After this COVID-19, there's, I don't know if it was somebody on this call that had sent it but there's this thing that, I'm not sure we want to go back to normal, because normal is what got us here. And the idea of the more the merrier is what we've always worked with. I'm just wondering if there's conversation of creating like events do like concerts, right? Where they limit the number of people. And COVID-19 just brings it to my mind and to the foreground, because we may actually have too many people. It's too unsafe, right? It's an open space. You would never say it's an unlimited number of people for the community center, because there are fire violations and there's codes and there's parking. We don't seem to ever cap the number of people for events. So I think you guys did a lot of thinking about the numbers, but have you thought about capping events the way concerts do, so that it's manageable for the community, for all those people that aren't participating in the event, who have to drive around all the cars and all the people and all that. I'm just putting it out there because I don't know if you've thought about it or not. And it may be phase 2, and maybe let's go through this for a year, learn, see, did we get it right? Did we predict? There's always like the follow-up piece that says, oh, you know what, we've now realized, X, Y, and I'm okay with that. I just don't know if you've thought about it in that, and I'm asking that question. Can't hear
Right.
anything.
What we had thought about is capping the number of events or redirecting some events so that Main Street isn't shut down, 2 or 3 or 4 consecutive weekends in a row on a Saturday. We have thought about capping, numbers of types of events that are reoccurring. So in that context, we really haven't, and because until recently there really was not a sense of an event exceeded its, most of the
Right.
events we anticipated. Going forward, for many reasons, we may not be having the same type of large events, at least in the foreseeable near future. So that's another thing. Not too much of this was looked at through the COVID lens.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, Manny, you're
Yes,
up.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all the hard work, Stuart. There was a lot to read. I guess my question goes to, we did have a stakeholder meeting in regards to how do we put this together, sure. And I'm not sure if there was a follow-up with them in regards to what this policy is, and maybe just get a feedback from what they said or they had to say in regards to this. The other question that I had is actually more like something piggyback of what Omar mentioned in regards to scheduling. I think we had, and I know Jaime's been doing a great work and a lot of work on keeping the schedule. So I think part of that is create like an event schedule for people that will like to, do things in our community so they can actually see what the conflict or maybe a conflict at that time, and just to kind of keep track of that. I know we talked about a lot through the years, and I know Jaime's been doing an awesome job in putting all that stuff together. So I'm assuming that could be a link within, whenever this application or this program are be taking place on the recreation. And the other part that I wanted to ask on this one is, we usually get more like an application sample, I want to say, or just to get an idea on what the application is going to look like. I'm not sure if that someone has been working on it or they're working on it, because there's times that we like to see things that sometimes it kind of reflects in what the law is, and sometimes we have done it in the past. So I would like to hear what is the thought process on something like that. There's a lot of the questions that are already asked, so I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to repeat a lot of the other questions that was asked.
I think I could answer some of his questions. So
Yes,
with regards to the calendar, so one of the things that Bill and I were able to do is get this to go through the Community Pass program, which is what we use for current rec right now. So if you were at this time to go on there and try to book any room, a park, what have you, it shows you if it's already booked. And this is going to be able to tie into that. As far as, so I think that your question's going to be answered. Another thing that Bill had and I had discussed is on the recreation page, we'll have a special events page that will have the current calendar on there. So we'll be able to, we'll probably create some sort of a flyer that shows, monthly what's going on. And, we'll be able to share that with the different business owners so that they know what's going on, so that they can plan around that. Like if a business owner didn't know when, the Hispanic Fair would be, then they'll be able to see that information. With regards to the application, I've been working on a guidebook, which is going to have some information in it, but it really has to be based upon what the policy, what we decide today. So that is something that we can get out to you once I have a chance. I've started working on it, but some sections just need to be updated, and they have like rules, regulations, various things like that, but it will be all electronic. Something else that you haven't asked, but Bill looked into, and I think you'll be very happy to hear this. The application on Community Pass will be in English. It will be able to be translated in Spanish. If someone were to fill it out in Spanish, I don't know if this is any other language, but 100% in Spanish, when it gets submitted, you the recipient, like Bill, does not necessarily have to be able to speak Spanish because it will automatically translate it back into English. So it will make it very user-friendly for our community that may be able to read and write in Spanish. They don't have to get someone to help them to do it in English. They'll be able to do it in their native language, and then we'll be able to handle it in hours.
Great. Thank you. That's very
Okay.
helpful, obviously.
Yeah.
So in regards, I guess, to the what I guess, Karen, maybe the feedback that you got from the previous meeting that you had with stakeholders, was there a follow-up with them?
So a lot of that information was incorporated, and then we do want to, we wanted to take that now to the board, and then the next step would be not only the public hearing, but we would go back to stakeholders, as we would bring this information back to the stakeholders as well.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to actually hear back from them. Obviously, we talked about processions a lot and different events that happen through our community. So I would like to see what kind of feedback we get from them. And obviously, I guess the coordination will have to, a lot of this information will have to be not just in the recreation phase website, but also in our main page website, where if I want to do an event, typically I wasn't going to the recreations website portal. I used to just, if I was going to go just to the village manager's office and say, look, I want to do this, but now they'll be redirected to a different page. So, we want to make sure that all that stuff at some point it gets coordinated as well. So everybody's.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I'll be able to map it through the website like we do with various other topics, where if everyone goes through like how that's how you would go to whatever page on the website. I think there's 14 of us on here. I think we all look for different things in different ways. We're all different people, but the way the website is currently set up, I've created a lot of different mapping opportunities that take you directly to the same space.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. And any feedback on that, if you're like, you should put it over here or over there, we do that. Very easy.
You're great on that. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Of course, I know.
Is that it, Manny? Everything was covered?
That's all I have. Everybody else already asked
Okay.
questions that I may have had asked, so thank you.
So I still have a few questions and comments myself. Well, the first one that I had was pretty much addressed. I just want to circle back to it because it's kind of a big one, which is, what is a village-sponsored event? And we mentioned a couple of the parades. I think we need a little more clarification on parades. We essentially have 3 regularly scheduled parades. OFD parade, obviously, that is a village department. Memorial Day parade is organized by the Town of Ossining Central Organizing Committee for Veterans. I don't know what the history, and that's not a village committee. Is it a town committee? We're the village, but if the town is doing an event, if that's a town committee, is that a village sponsored event? And the Little League thing, the JCYS. Youth sports is something that does operate as part of our youth programming for my recreation department. So I really want to understand this, because I don't want there to be any misunderstanding or abuse of, well, we're really great for the village. We want to be a village sponsored event. You should sponsor it because we're fulfilling your big picture goals of economic development, youth programming, whatever it is. If it's directed by the village or a village department, and it's directed by our staff, and it's not a fundraiser for any other organization, then I see it as a village-sponsored event. That's a very, very, very short list. And I'd like us to either write down what the list is, carve it in stone and never change it, or create very, very, very clear parameters of what it is. Otherwise, the people who sit in these seats 5-10 years from now are going to be having the same annoying conversation where people feel that they've been mistreated. So I think we've all made that point. I just wanted to put an exclamation point on it, that please, let's not have any misunderstanding of what is a village sponsored event.
That's a great point. And your input on this collectively is greatly appreciated.
Okay. So then the next few things I do want to discuss in this forum, but then, you know, I guess there's going to be maybe some tweaking here, and then we'll see what the next steps are. On page 3, we talk about all the things that are not, that are exempt. And we go into like some detail about things on private property. So I guess my first question is actually related to a few times. So when there's things happening on private property, somebody's home, they're having a wedding or a party, or a church, it's happening on church-owned property, they still need a tent permit. They still need an electrical permit if they're running a bunch of wires all over the place. Like, they still need some permits, or they can do whatever they want.
No, they need those permits. They just don't need a special event permit.
Okay, and they still need to be in compliance with our noise ordinance, right?
Yes, they do.
Yes. Okay,
Isn't
and
there-
the police are still required to reinforce that regardless of how wonderful an organization or event it is, right?
They would have to. This is only dealing with special event permits.
Okay.
Is there a number associated with that? I don't know if I heard you say. I thought it was over 50 people, or is it any number of people?
That's for expressive public act. That's for expressive activity.
So that's my next
separate.
question, actually, the assemblage thing. And Stuart, I think I need your help in better understanding. You did go into some explanation, but I'm still not totally clear on an assemblage. And how is this not? How would a church not be able to say that we qualify as that for an event?
What kind of event, Mayor?
Because this assemblage is not. Let me just make sure I understand. This assemblage is not necessarily on private property, is it?
Well, I mean, an assemblage itself, just by the term, does not have to be on private property. No, but you're asking me about a religious event. The religious event that's held at a religious at a facility where approved for such purposes, that's okay. I mean,
and for such purposes, a field next to a church it counts as approved for that purpose. It's still a church
assuming
property.
that that's okay with the zoning code.
I have no idea. I don't know if Jaime knows. So then help me understand the assembly. Number 4 is an assemblage. So then we're not talking about private property anymore. An assemblage for the purpose of expressive activity provided that the organizers. So I think this is intended for, matters of political free speech or people gathering and it only requires 48 hours and it doesn't have the whole permit process because it's pretty simple. But to me, this reads that processions are exempt.
No, processions are not exempt. Religious processions are defined as a special event.
Wouldn't they be able to argue? I guess what I don't understand is is there another definition of what an assemblage is or expressive activity?
Yes, expressive activity is defined.
Yeah, where's that? Right here, probably, right?
Page 2, Mayor.
All righty, let me just see. Page 2?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I have it on page 1, but that's okay. Isn't freedom of religion part of free speech?
Mayor, I think we're going to parse things here. Religious processions are not covered. This would be a political event, essentially. If they want to make that argument, they can make the argument, but they are two different things.
Okay, I'll move on. Page 4. Oh, you know what? This is if there's going to be liquor served, then the event organizer needs to get a license from the SLA, the State Liquor Authority. Part of that process, we talk about there needing to be a permit if it's going to be alcohol sold on village property. It seems that the state has a de facto permit because the village has to sign the landlord authorization form for the SLA before they will grant an event permit to sell alcohol. So that is inherently, the village won't sign it if we're not permitting it. So I don't think there needs to be an additional permit saying that we're going to sign the form because they can't even apply to the state without it.
Well, the form then is done very early in the process. To be honest, I don't have the answer to your question. You know, the idea was not to charge for the permit. And presumably if it's been granted already, what the State Liquor Authority does is it allows someone to sell off premises. It does not give the specific location necessarily where they're selling, except they're going to sell off premises.
Actually, part of the event permit from the SLA requires that whatever property you're selling on, if it's private property or public property, that the owner of the property has to sign a landlord authorization form.
Understood.
So when it's in the village, it would be the village. It would be the mayor, actually, I think. Or the mayor. I don't know if it's the mayor.
I'm actually pretty familiar with this particular process of the SLA. If you're interested in me kind of digging into the details of how it works. I'm pretty familiar with it too. Yeah. All right.
We could talk about it later if you want.
I don't understand the question. So what is the question here?
I don't believe there needs to be an additional actual permit because the village staff itself will determine if the landlord authorization form should ever be signed, so that the event organizer could even apply to the SLA to get their event permit to sell alcohol outside of premises on village property. So that's all I'm saying. We could create more paperwork if we need to, but the reality is they can't apply for it unless we permit them to apply for it. Then my other question has to do with insurance. On page 5.
Yes, ma'am.
So we have $1 million per occurrence and $3 million in the aggregate. Yes. Is that per occurrence referring to per event or per claim at the same event?
Per claim at the event. That's why you have the $3 million aggregate.
So like if 3 people had made claims or whatever, or 20 million people made, or 1,000 people made claims, then it could go as high as $3 million for one event. That's our understanding from our insurance provider.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly what it means.
Okay. If more than 3 people had claims, any one of them might be as much as $1 million, and then up to 3 of them could be paid for up to $3 million, is what you're saying, on that one single event.
That's correct.
All righty. As far as we talked about rain date, and I think that actually, Trustee Lopez, when you were talking about getting a rebate, we sometimes, I know there's events that have rain dates, like had the village fair, I think has been postponed. It is difficult for organizers to have rain dates because there's so much organization for every vendor to take the day off and staff it and be ready. So nobody wants to ever postpone their event, but our application is not going to be codified. And I like the way that Stuart wrote it, that, you know, it's like, the application form shall include without limitation the following. I assume that means all of these things, and then anything else that we realize along the way needs to be included. Like we could say, do you want a rain date, and what is included with that, and then beyond that doesn't need to be codified. We need to have flexibility.
That's correct.
Okay. And I'll just chime in. I think you saw my feeling on waiving fees. So Karen, paint a picture for me of any scenario in the world that would justify waiving fees for any event that does not already qualify as a village-sponsored event, which is like 4 or 5 things that is written in stone.
I have none.
Okay, then I think that if that's one of the topics we're supposed to discuss, that it's off the table. There will never be fees waived in the village of Ossining for an event.
I do not have an issue with that. Although I'm sure as I say that, we'll be hit with some plague of locust or something that will create a need to do an event without a fee. But right now, as
I think that I would not agree to it, but I think the most common one that we have heard, to be fair, is people who are doing something for the first time. They don't know how many people are going to be there. They don't have really the money to start. I think that's the most common one, but I think that there has to be an agreement that while we're sympathetic to somebody who's trying to start and do an event for the first time, you have to have a few $100s to run an event. And if you don't have that, you got to go raise it. So I agree that there should not be, but realistically, I think that's been the most often cited one.
And it's good for the community. And
Well,
they
that-
are
it
all
goes without
potentially good
saying.
for community.
Whatever.
Yeah, I think everything's good for the community though. So I don't see that as an exception.
So but that does bring me to the last thing I was going to ask about, which is next steps. And as Stuart mentioned earlier, we are going to have a lot of public hearings whenever we are allowed to again have public hearings. We're going to have so many things teed up. We're just going to sit around and have public hearings for weeks on end. And I look forward to that. And we're getting a lot of things lined up for that. We all mentioned more than once that we had that stakeholders meeting at the community center a few months back, and a number of people attended, and it was lovely. Now that we have draft legislation that really, you all have done such a great job at distilling such copious amounts of research, so many priorities that we've all discussed. This is much easier for me to follow. It's really being asked for and recommended than the last time we met. So thank you. This is very, very helpful. I think that the next step, which is something we can do very well in the time of virtual meetings, is to reach back out to anyone we reached out to for that previous stakeholders meeting, anyone who showed up if we had an attendance sheet for that stakeholders meeting, and say, hey, look, I don't know, maybe not this week, maybe takes a little while if there's any tweaking that's going to come out as a result of tonight's discussion. But there's no reason, I don't think, by, the second week of June that we couldn't be, sending this draft, link to this meeting, this piece of the meeting to all of the potential stakeholders, people who have expressed interest in events or have held events or attended that meeting, and say, we're hosting a virtual meeting. We need to hear from you. And maybe they're going to come up with all of the reasons that we aren't thinking of why we should have the option to waive fees. And I want to hear that from them, or any of the other questions before we then take it to a public hearing. And then when we go to the public hearing, it's already been sort of pre-vetted by the people who are going to be most directly impacted by it. And that could include not just event folks, but maybe it includes local businesses who have concerns and questions about it, who want to participate or have expressed interest in it. So whoever you think is that, pool of people to invite and ask them for their feedback, either to attend a virtual Zoom meeting. If they're not available, they could send any questions or comments in writing. To me, that would be a really good use of this pre-public hearing time. Does that make sense to the staff that would have to make that happen?
Yeah, yes, I think we can, that makes very, very good sense. I think we can do that.
Great.
I think, Mayor, that the question for a public hearing came up in Bill's previous presentation about the Youth Bureau, if I'm not mistaken. And he asked that we sort of go forward, even though public hearings won't be available yet. That's, I think, the context of that was brought up. We never actually answered that question. I would like to say that for me, public hearings are super important. I mean, they may be very quiet sometimes, but the opportunity for people we may have missed while we think we've crossed all the T's and dotted the I's, it's an opportunity. It's also a recorded involvement by people, even if it's not a controversial issue. So I like your idea a lot for this one. And I think when the doors open, where we might have a couple public hearings in one night about issues. And my answer is, yay, good.
Agreed.
Democracy at work.
Agreed. The more public hearings we have, the more people will show up, and maybe they'll comment on everything, and there'll be a very robust public engagement when we're all in a room together. I have a feeling we'll be sitting 3 seats apart from each other, and people will have to sign up and be waiting out on the sidewalk, but we'll make it work. Okay, is there anything more on events before we move on? Any more comments from staff or from elected officials? Awesome. Madam Manager.
Sorry. Next up, so on the agenda that I have, we were going to talk about virtual village initiative next. We also have our wetlands legislation. So I'm thinking that given the time, we might want to go to wetlands legislation. And virtual village, I think, is a pretty simple concept that we can wrap up with. But I defer to the board.
No, I think that the order was recommended. It had to do with who we could let go home after we discussed virtual village. Is there someone who gets to go home after virtual village or go
no.
off camera? No, okay. then it doesn't matter. Then whatever you want.
That was also my thinking. So I know that we've had Jaime sitting here who's patiently sat through the meeting, and I think we can now let Bill go home, and I think our finance staff probably could have gone home, or I guess everybody's home. They could have turned off their cameras and started watching Seinfeld reruns.
Go eat something.
Yeah, go eat, check your pets, whatever. So anyway, anyone who's no longer on the schedule can tune out if they would like. Although everybody's always welcome to stay. So.
Always welcome. Lovely to see your face.
So we'll go ahead. So if that's the case, let's go ahead with the wetlands discussion. This is a carryover from last week's meeting. We at that point last week, our director of planning, Jaime Martinez, presented some thoughts and Stuart Kahan presented thoughts on wetlands legislation. We are going to continue that discussion tonight, and I turn it over to our Director of Planning and Corporation Counsel.
Hello, Mayor, trustees. Thank you again for taking the time now to take a look at this wetlands ordinance and give some opportunity to, I guess, further refine it from comments from you. I know that last week we had kind of a presentation. There is no presentation today to go over because there's really nothing new to add to that piece. However, there were a few questions that we were asked to follow up with, and fortunately we were able to get answers to some of those questions, and we were unfortunately not able to get answers to others. So just really quickly, I wanted to give you the response from the EAC, which I think was one of the bigger questions to the concern about what their feelings were about this, and they had some pretty exhaustive comments. There were, first, I believe all these comments were sent to the entire board, but first, one of them was just the comment saying that the EAC agrees that permits for certain activities within a village wetland buffer may not need EAC review, especially those activities where no new impervious surface is created. For example, construction of fences, swing sets, and hardscaping using forest pavers and forest asphalt. Any construction within the wetland buffer that results in a net increase in impervious surface should have additional review by the EAC, including new driveway or patio surface using an impervious product such as asphalt or construction of new decks. The construction thereof, while not necessarily increasing impervious surface, does result in changes to water flow during storm events due to riling between decking planks. Additionally, the environment under a deck is often inhospitable to plants, and therefore construction thereof often results in the net loss of rainwater capture and transpiration, thus causing a net increase in storm water runoff into adjacent wetlands and watercourses. This is pretty much consistent, I think, with what was in the recommended text, with the exception of the deck. The deck is a shift from what was put forward before. So I think that's an area where the board would want to weigh in whether or not they agree with the EAC's recommendations, or if they agree with the text as written to allow for decks of a certain size under, I believe it was written to be under either 100 square feet or 200 square feet, that could be built as long as there was no impact to the ground outside of any footings that were put on the ground to basically place the deck into use. The next item was that they agreed with the extension of buffers to the top of steep slopes, as these tend to be unstable during construction. The third item was that the EAC does not recommend that the BOT adopts a payment in lieu of mitigation for a number of reasons. They have a pretty significant comment on that, which all of you have access to. But I think that the gist of it, in talking with Stuart about this earlier today, the gist of it is that, you know, the wetlands that we have in Ossining at this point are sort of all that remain. So because of the construction that's taken place over the last 100 years, there really aren't that many wetlands left, because a lot of the water courses that were there before that would have fed into these natural wetlands sort of disappeared. And that's why when you look at the town of Ossining or you look at Briarcliff Manor, they have more wetlands simply because they have less development over time. And so I think that their general statement was that a payment in lieu of actually doing those mitigation measures would not be advisable because the cost over time would be higher than whatever payment they're going to make, and it really doesn't benefit the intent of the wetlands ordinance. I think this is a matter you have to take up. Personally, I see a lot of merit in that comment, but I think that that's a matter that you as a board would have to really consider whether or not you agree with the comment of removing the payment in lieu of. There was also some comments from Joe Axinelli that was just trying to make sure that if any mitigation measures are taking place, that the landscape architect, whoever prepared those mitigation measures as designed, should provide as-built after the work is done, or should certify that the work was completed so that we ensure that the mitigation measures that were produced as a part of the wetlands exchange that took place during the development did actually get completed as needed. And at this time, we're still awaiting a review memo from Kellard Sessions. We're awaiting for a quote from Land Use Council to see if they can review this as well. And I have reached out to the village engineer, Paul Frioli, but I didn't email him until today. I actually typed up a memo to him last week and then checked today, and I saw that I never pressed send. So unfortunately, I did not give him enough time to adequately weigh in on the text. So he has not had a chance to see it and review it. So that's where we are. Before I missed one really prominent quote at the question at the end was the question about creating a supermajority of the EA, like essentially allowing the EAC to weigh in on denying an application. That is something that comes from North Castle. I have some concerns about sort of ceding the power that currently rests with the planning board, which is a board that's required to get training and is required to be sort of at a certain standard of education in terms of planning matters, that actually have the ability to legally approve site plans to allow projects to go forward, and ceding that responsibility and power essentially over to the EAC. But I don't know enough about the process yet, and Kellard Sessions, through their work with North Castle, is going to be providing us with more information on how exactly that works. What they've said to this point is that even though that provision does exist, it's never actually been exercised. Other than that, I don't know enough about the process to weigh in any heavier than that.
I'll just say that our EAC also does have a training requirement, an annual training requirement. I don't know if that's typical in most cases. And I don't think, anyway, I found that very interesting, but there was so much else that you said that I want to open it up to further questions and comments, even though it also sounds like we still will have a little bit more feedback to get from the village engineer and the consulting engineer as well, which can further inform us if there's any additional changes we want to make to our thinking going forward. But from where we are now, this was really great information we got from the EAC. I appreciate their attention to this and their thoughtful insights and recommendations. And I'd like to hear from fellow trustees. Rika, I see you're ready to speak, so go for it.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just left my mic on. I don't have to go first. Sorry about that. I mean, I can. I like what EAC wrote. I had seen it like everybody else. I got it at the same time. I thought their commentary was on point, and I think and thank you, Village Planner Martinez, because I thought you read some of it verbatim, but you recapped some of it, which is great. Their concept of payment in lieu of, I thought was spot on, because we've seen in other categories of municipalities, when other municipalities have bought their way out, or developers have bought their way out, or anybody has bought themselves. We've seen affordable housing in Westchester. We've seen others, and I'm opposed to that. I don't think people should buy their way out of these things, because it is really anti the intent of the legislation to begin with. And so I thought their points were spot on. I wanted to ask Village Planner Martinez, when is the due date for Paul and for Session Color to get back to us?
Kellard Sessions, I have a Zoom meeting with them on Friday. So I'm expecting to get their comments by then. I'm not sure about Paul. I haven't asked him. I did send it to him today, but I did not check in with him to see what his time frame is. I'll try to see if he can be available on that call as well, and hopefully we can get some comments
Okay,
by
you're
Friday.
getting comments in writing or you're getting comments in a conversation?
I'd prefer to have them in writing, but
Okay.
I'll talk to Paul.
All right, great. So I just like to, I mean, we can move forward without the input, but I don't want that holding things up. As was already pointed out, when the doors open, there are going to be a lot of issues to deal with.
I
so
do
that's
want to
great.
note,
Thank you.
there was an application, not an application, but there was a developer who came in the other day, and they were interested in developing on a property, and it was just sort of an exploratory conversation. They reached out to the village manager, and I was on the call as well, and the conversation immediately when they mentioned the site, I said, well, is it this site behind the firehouse on Snowden Avenue? They said yes. I said, you know, that entire site's in a it's in a wetland. It's like it's in a buffer area that is most likely.
Jaime wasn't anyway. Yeah, it's a different site.
Oh, I apologize.
In the same
Okay.
area.
Okay, yeah. But it basically it sort of ended the conversation on looking at it as a developable site. So I think it kind of had the impact that you're looking for, right? Having the wetlands ordinance will prevent development on wetlands.
That's not the impact I'm looking for at all. I'm looking to prevent the environment because we're on the side of a cliff and there are hundreds of bodies of water. The consequence and a developer and their conclusions, one developer will say, fine, let me figure it out. And others will say, okay. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to know that the Hudson Valley has a lot of wetland issues. So it's not, that wasn't my intent.
No, yeah, my apologies. I didn't mean to convey it that way. What I meant was that it was, I think in that instance, it so far is shown to be successful in helping to preserve those existing wetlands.
Right, you have to look at it and see how you could work with it, not against it or around it. That's it. Anyway, so I think you had other questions from last time. I'll let others speak, but thank you. I just wanted to say that the AC actually, I thought, answered most of your questions from that evening because, really well. And I want to thank you again for taking the time to meet with them as well. I don't know, is the mayor on or not?
I'm here. I just
okay, sorry, I don't see
anybody
you.
else. If you're all good, Rika, then is there anybody else with questions or comments from fellow trustees? Just on my, there you go, Manny, you're first.
Thank you.
It's a race to unmute.
Thank you, Jaime. Obviously, this, I'm not going to talk about the memo that we received. I'm not going to disagree with a lot of the stuff that they said. I would like to hear more about, obviously, from Paul and Joe from Kellard Sessions in regards to, because a lot of the stuff is going to be going in front of them. A lot of the stuff is going to go in front of the planning board. Some of the stuff they're going to have to deal with. I think not my concern, but more like something that we have to keep in mind is, one thing that you mentioned in regards to a swing set, a shed that is going to be within 10 feet or 5 feet of your property line that fall within that. Right now, if I'm in a wetland buffer in a way, I guess, if we had these laws right now in place, you don't need a permit to put a shed in the back as long as you meet the minimum criteria. You don't have to have a foundation. There's a lot of education that we're going to have to do to the public in general in regards to what this means. So, it goes back to a lot of information that we have to share with our community. What does this mean exactly? So we have to put in lame terms and simplify a lot of this stuff because a lot of things get complicated sometimes. I think within that part, some of the stuff is going to be one of the things that you mentioned last time was the building department is going to be issuing these permits, these kind of situations. And you know, I don't think, me personally, I don't feel that, you know, the building department issues building permits. You know, it has nothing to do with wetlands, you know, but how do we help if they have to be doing that work? How do we help them? Or is it better suited that your office will issue this wetland permits? You know, how does that work for you and your end? You know, who's going to be, you know, enforcing this? And that's something that, you know, I still, I don't understand enough, I guess, and how will that enforcement will be in either or scenario, is either in your office and on the building department end. You know, because we're not experts in wetlands. What does that mean? Even with as-built situations or a letter certified from an architect or an engineer, what does that mean exactly? So we have to have someone that help us out to kind of understand the situations of each small application. Obviously, when it's a big development, they go in front of the planning board, and all the approval process is done by then, and we have our consultant, in this case is Scala Sessions, and they do all the review of all these situations. So I'm not too concerned about big projects and the review process. I'm concerned more in a small project where they're doing a swing set in the backyard, you know, a small shed. You know, what does that mean exactly for a small, you know, for a 1-family, 2-family resident family kind of stuff. So I think that's the one that I have more concerns than anything else right now.
Yeah, so you know, the way that the text is written right now requires that the wetlands review takes place based off of the map that designates where the wetlands are. As I mentioned last week at the meeting, the wetlands are essentially a mixture of NWI, National Wetland Inventory, mapped wetlands, DEC, mapped wetlands, and hydric soils that are produced by the Soil Survey. We use that data and marry it with the town assessor's GIS parcel-based data to create a map that we're able to keep in-house. But we're also able to kind of digitally connect that for people. So we could probably work with the county to get, you know, where you can sort of connect our GIS online. You can see your parcel. You can see if there's wetlands on your site with them, for them to do that at home. And then if somebody submits an application for anything, when they come in, we can just do a quick check internally to make sure that they're not on a wetland. So, you know, we look to use just sort of a fabricated GIS map that would allow us to really quickly just do a Google search, not a Google search, but an address search of that site to see whether it's on a site that has wetlands. If it's not, then it could sort of move forward. And if it is, then it, you know, it'll obviously have to affect whatever we start looking at that point to see whether or not what they need to do is something that's covered under the administrative piece of it, or whether it's something that would require a higher level of review getting sent to the EAC. So some of the comments from the EAC were essentially that they wanted a higher level of, I guess, referral authority. So they wanted to decrease the amount of things that could go under administrative review to include the items that they listed, which I think essentially is the same list as what we've been looking at initially, minus the decks. So I believe they wanted to add the decks now and require that that gets kicked out to the EAC. And so for certain smaller administrative items that, you know, I think that the way the text was written before, the small administrative items could still get kicked out to the EAC theoretically, but there's like a 10-day period where they have to respond to the application and get back to the applicant, which could mean that, you know, for somebody who wants to put up a shed, that it could take them, you know, almost 2 weeks to get an approval to put up a shed or a deck or something like that if it got kicked out to the EAC. And if not, it would get kicked to the planning board and then would have to go through the normal process of going to the EAC meeting and then going to the planning board and everything else.
So and it's a good thing that you brought that up, because I was going to wait for all this to have a deeper conversation. If that's the case, that's going to be an application fee, correct?
Yeah, I believe so. I didn't. Maybe Stuart can kind of weigh in on this, but I don't know if we spent too much time looking at the fee aspects of it yet. But
There would be a fee for the wetlands permit application, sure.
If they have to go in front of the EAC. Just like if someone in downtown has to go in front of the HPC, there's an application process. So that's
Well, it's not because they're going in front of the EAC. EAC is still in an advisory situation. The permit is either going to be granted, either let's say by the planner or the building inspector or the planning board. The EAC is not granting any of these permits.
Thank you for clarifying that. So my question goes back. So if I'm doing a deck right now, okay, and it falls within this category of the wetlands, I have to pay my building permit fee, correct? So
Yes.
now do I have to add an additional fee for wetlands as well?
I don't believe that we have a fee schedule associated with the text that we sent you just yet.
I understand that. No, I
Yeah,
understand.
no, I guess what I mean is that we have not given consideration to whether or not an additional fee should be assessed.
Okay, so again, I don't mind going through the review process. The problem that I have is we have a lot of fees for a lot of stuff. And I don't want to turn this to a different conversation, but I want to keep this in mind to the rest of my colleagues that, I hate doing additional fees for simple stuff. I don't mind the review process, but again, if we're going to be adding an additional fee to these items, then there's going to be, we try to help the small resident, the small 1 family, 2 families to expedite a lot of the stuff. To me, putting an additional layer where we have to put an additional additional fee, then I think that's going to be a problem that I may have.
I'd like to just amend. I sort of skimmed over. I said I agree with everything. Actually, as Village Planner Martinez pointed out, I like his administrative scenario more than the EAC's recommendation for the decks. I don't agree. And to your point, Manny, it's these small structures. I don't agree with that, with their note. If that's also what you're getting at.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would be comfortable recommending that there would be no additional fees associated with the wetlands ordinance for small administrative items. However, for larger projects, if you have a site that technically is mapped to have wetlands on it on the official map, you still don't know where the official, beginning and end of that is. That's sort of general GIS data. So a landscape architect's going to have to go out and verify where the wetland starts and where the buffer ends and everything else. That is an additional fee that's going to be a cost that has to be incurred by the developer. And so I don't think that the village should assume responsibility for those fees. But in an administrative review, there's not going to be a landscape architect involved because it's going to be for these very minimal types of items. They're kinds that would have very little impact in terms of impact to wetlands. And because they go through the administrative review, if somebody comes and says, I want to put a shed in the back of my yard, and they say, well, that's in the buffer. If you just move it 20 feet this way, you'll be almost out of the buffer. So why don't you just move it over here? We have the ability to say that. And if we're not charging them an additional fee, then it's not really a big deal.
Yeah, but the shed example is not exactly accurate, correct? Because right now we don't need a building permit if it's not a permanent structure. So technically,
yeah,
if I don't know if I'm not in the wetland zone buffer, I can just put that item, within that, and I will never know, and the village will never know either. So again, that kind of goes back to the piece of education and how do we communicate. We are changing this, some laws in some areas of our community for people that are aware, and especially for the community members that actually live within that buffer area. So I think that's, again, at some point of time, we have to make sure that we are very clear, sending the message, sending the information that's needed for those owners.
Yeah, I will. I had a conversation with the planner, the former planning director for Greenberg, who went through this process many years ago when it first got implemented. And one of the biggest concerns he had was that it was sort of unenforceable in certain places when you have rules like this, especially where somebody could put a shed up before and they didn't have to check, they didn't have to find out if they were in a wetland. and now they do. It's really going to be, to be honest, in those instances, it's going to be very difficult to create awareness of this new rule and also enforce it. I mean, it'll be very difficult.
No, I mean, it becomes a non-conforming situation on those cases, so, but again, that's something that we can discuss more. I'm just looking forward to the information that you get from our engineer and our consultant, and kind of take it from there and go from, or have a deeper discussion on this issue. So, but thank you.
Okay. Bob or Omar, do we have any more questions and comments on this next phase of consideration of wetlands legislation?
I do not.
Okay, there you are. Omar Lopez, any thoughts from you?
I think Manny said it all.
Great. Okay, so thank you very much again to Erica Bosch, who sent us the email, and I know that there were other members of the EAC who were watching our meeting when we had this previous discussion, and I really, really appreciate the dedication of the members of the EAC. It is such an impressive group that is so engaged and brings so much to the table. We're really, really fortunate to have them as true advisors on this. I don't know that we necessarily need to go into any detail right now, unless people want to, about, Jaime, you brought back up the conversation about the potential for having a supermajority to override any recommendations raised by the EAC requiring a supermajority of the planning board. That's interesting that North Castle's never had to invoke it. I think the reason why I find it, I used to serve on EAC before I was a village trustee. It was a little frustrating that we could spend a lot of time reviewing things, put together a long report of all of our minutes, and then, go to the planning board and they were required to read it and to, not really do that much with it. If I think there's value to the EAC being able to really provide a report like they did to us here, and saying that overriding them with 5 instead of 4 members of the planning board isn't an insurmountable goal for the planning board to be able to reach that. So I don't think it's taking away a lot of authority of the planning board, but I think it is granting and acknowledging the integral role that an environmental review should have for the if we're bothering to do wetlands legislation, to have the EAC's environmental review have a real, some substance to it that has to truly be answered for. That's my argument for it, and I'd also like to understand if we're going to incorporate that into wetlands legislation. I don't recall if that language was in the current legislation.
It is not.
Yeah, so I would mention, we've been having a discussion internally about the EAC and matters that are kind of getting sent to them. It became clear actually a few days ago that type 1 and unlisted items west of Route 9 get sent to the EAC. Type 2 items don't need to get sent to the EAC technically under the ordinance as written. So what the wetlands ordinance does is it really opens up the EAC to a lot of new items, right? And so, since I've come here, one of the things that was clear in the process with the complaints about Birchbrook was essentially that the planning board had time to look at this item and then made a decision some ways down the road that it needed to be sent out to the EAC to be looked at. Even though it wasn't required, it made sense to send them to the EAC. And so what that has sort of crystallized for me is that there's a problem, I think, at the beginning with the intake of these projects where they're not being properly evaluated to determine where they need to go. And so it's not really a good idea, I think, to waste anybody's time, whether that's the planning board or the EAC or the developer or anyone involved in this process. I think what's important is that if somebody comes to the table and they come to the planning department and they say, we want to put an application, at that point in time, we should be telling them, you need to go to the EAC, you need to go to the zoning board, you need to go to the planning board, you need to send everything to all these people right now and get this process moving forward so that we can have an expeditious review. And I think that if you did that process early on, it probably would have yielded a project that would have been less, offensive to to certain sensibilities. I think that we probably would have ended up with a project that was more amenable to people's concerns. It may not have, ameliorated everybody's concerns, but it probably would have been something that would have been less problematic over time. So I think that the use of the wetlands ordinance really puts the onus on the planning board that says you have to follow these rules. And the rules about the wetlands ordinance, I think, are more than just saying the EAC should have the opportunity to weigh in. It's about protecting wetlands at the end of the day. So creating these barriers means that essentially the authority rests with the planning board to be the arbiter of how these mitigation measures are handled. But you still have to do one-for-one mitigation if they do allow it to go in there. And there's still a lot of reason to sort of try to prevent as much activity taking place in those buffer areas, but it doesn't prevent that activity from happening. So handing that power over to the EAC is a choice that I think is up to, it's up to all of you. But I guess the question is whether or not you think the planning board is not really listening to the EAC. And I think the response to that is, if they haven't been listening to the EAC in regards to wetland matters up to now, this ordinance requires them to listen to wetlands concerns, whether it comes from the EAC or whether it comes from this ordinance, just as a matter of course.
Oh, Ricky, you just turned your mic off. I thought you were going to say something.
I'm being silly. I should keep shutting the mute off, although most of the folks in my house aren't making any noise at this point. But I wouldn't have used that same language. I think there are checks and balances in all committees, and there's purpose to them. And I think it's a healthier environment for the long and short term, for there to be more than one committee and for run by chairs. I think this is a healthy addition to the process.
Are you speaking largely about the wetlands, or are you speaking specifically about the potential for the EAC to have a recommendation be overridden if the
I was speaking about both. The comment that you made, because you were on the EAC so it's a little bit it's for both.
Yeah. Well, I think what Jaime is suggesting is that we're all in agreement that the EAC should have a more of a presence in this process, and to be brought in earlier in the process, whether it's wetlands or any other application that is in any way, type 1, type 2, whatever the potential project is, that they should be at the beginning of this process. And I don't know if that's something that we need to codify or put in some formal language, so that if we someday don't have Jaime as our director of planning and somebody who's not as keenly aware of the importance of involving all of our land use boards early on, or maybe we don't, for whatever reason, like, I like to institutionalize things so that when all the brilliant people who figure this out the first time, that when we're all gone, that, goodness knows who's going to be here 10 years from now, and that they're following these same practices that we've realized really make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with you 100% on that statement. As of even today, me and Karen were discussing ways of sort of institutionalizing a formal process that kind of, breeds integrity into the process, it breeds efficiency into the process, it breeds some level of coordinated review amongst all of the different parties. Paul Priolo has expressed his desire to be brought into the process as early as possible to allow him to at least make a decision on to whether or not he needs to weigh in on the review of these projects or not. And it's clear that we have a real issue of just intake. That, in most municipalities, you have this plan review that takes place that tells everybody what they need to do at the very beginning of the process before anything starts. It's clear that needs to take place here, but I think that the goal is over the next couple of weeks to create, a standard framework for how we're going to handle projects moving forward. And that's something that would be outside of any one individual who's sitting in their respective seats. I come, many years ago, I got my start in government in the county, And they always said, you know, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow, so you better make sure everybody knows where everything is. And I agree with that. It's so, you know, it's really important that the process outlives the individual.
Exactly.
So Jaime, on your graph that you presented to us on steps that has to be taken, and I guess it's for you and Stuart, what's the next step? I heard listening, getting advice from Paul and commentary, I guess, from more staff. Okay, what is the next step in the process?
If you want, I can actually pull up that presentation and I will show you the steps so that I don't have to draw it from memory. But he has to let me share. I got it open. It's I need to be able to share the screen.
So while Jaime's opening that, you know, I think that this is, there's so many good things that have been raised from this process, and it follows on the heels of our ongoing discussions about better integrating the land use boards, making sure that we have sufficient training, and as we go forward with this, really honoring that process, I think is going to be very important. So I want to underscore the importance that these volunteers take on an enormous responsibility. The training and the skills that these people bring forth has to be something that we're really cognizant about too. And I think that that's also something that we should institutionalize in some way so that those things carry on, and we create that culture within the whole planning process, so that we make sure that, again, if any of us, let's say we win lotto, I don't know, maybe we don't have to get hit by a bus, or we have to move, or whatever it is. If one of us isn't here, everything stands. We have a process that's embedded in best practices and a high degree of competency.
So the next step is once we have the final draft of the wetlands ordinance, the text, essentially, we move on to the completion of the full environmental assessment form. So the goal would be at this point for me to complete that full environmental assessment form within, you know, the next 4 to 6 weeks after the completion of that. And I would, you know, make an evaluation the very first week to see whether it was something that I could complete myself or if I needed assistance from Kellard Sessions. But either way, it would take about, you know, 4 weeks. So it'd be looking about, you know, following up a month to 6 weeks after that with the beginning of that process with the completion of the full environmental assessment form. That would then lead to the Board of Trustees declaring their intent to be lead agency.
So approximately 4 weeks plus for you to go through the next step.
4 to 6 weeks, yeah. After the completion of the text, yes. Okay.
I thought you were going to take the screen away, so I ate a snack.
I did, you know, I was going to, but I can't seem to, I can't share. At least I couldn't before.
Need you a co-host.
Yeah, you can make me a co-host, but you don't have to. You can actually just allow sharing, I think.
I don't know if it.
To all panelists.
I think we got the gist because.
Yeah, I think
I don't know if it's necessary. Yeah, I don't know if it's necessary.
Okay, yeah, you went through it. You just took away my snack opportunity.
I apologize. I'll try to do better next time.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I can wait. We're nearing the end here. So then I guess I just need to have some, I don't feel super strongly about the North Castle thing. And I think that, you know, Jaime definitely has some reservations. I would just ask when you have your conversation with Joe Cermelli and get feedback from him, since he's the one who brought the concept to our attention, that you maybe explore it with him a little bit further, and maybe he could help us, you know, to make a decision on if we feel that we really want to include that or not, or if there's some other pathway that we can formalize the role of the EAC so that their input is solicited and acknowledged and really influencing this process. So that I guess I'm not gonna,
absolutely.
I'm not gonna, you know, march in front of that parade if there's not a strong sense from my colleagues on the board or staff that that's the best pathway to achieve this greater goal of the important role that the EAC should be playing, particularly in this or in any of the.
Yeah, I'd make two comments to that. I think that, you know, I will definitely, number one, I will definitely follow up with Taylor's session and get a full report back on that. But North Castle also has a payment in lieu of, which doesn't make sense. So, you know, sometimes you got to pick and choose what you like best from the various municipalities. And so, you know, one municipality may be doing it exactly right and the other one may not. The other thing I would mention is that I think it is clear that there may be some concern that the planning board doesn't have a strong enough environmental bent. And so as, you know, seats open up on the planning board, you know, you may want to pick some people from the EAC and say, hey, are you interested in joining the planning board? So that would be the easiest way to codify that kind of thinking in the planning process.
Well, yes. If you have the great applicants and a board that's cognizant of it and a manager that's cognizant of it, but you know, that would be a de facto way of making it happen.
We'll all work together on this. I think we're all on the same page, so.
Okay, so is there anything else on this process or on what we want to include regarding wetlands? All right, so Jaime, you've got a month or month and a half to work on the EAF. Is that where we're at? And then.
Yep.
No, we need to have complete text first. So I will work to get as much information back to you from Keller Sessions and from Paul Frioli. And so hopefully we can have something at least to turn in to the Board of Trustees next week to send out as an email. And then if Stuart is comfortable with, or if everybody else is comfortable with where we land, I guess Stuart would have to complete the final text, and then we can move forward from there.
Is it reasonable for you to be able to report back to us next week, and then we can finalize any terms that we want to have in the text so that Stuart can give you a final version within the week after that, and then the 4 to 6 weeks could start? Is next week a reasonable time for you to have heard from Joe and Paul? And
I will definitely have heard from Joe Tremelli by then. I imagine I will have heard from Paul by then. I will keep all of my Wednesdays open. So, so yeah, sure. I'm comfortable coming back. I don't know if I'll have enough information for you by then until I get a chance to talk with Paul Frioli. Okay, but I would assume that would be enough.
We'll shoot for that then. We'll shoot for that.
Jaime, in a short amount of time, you become a regular on this weekly series that we run here. So thank you for your time.
It's like, you know, Zoom has created a whole new meaning to FaceTime, you know, so.
You have to put them you got to put them in the credits.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, this is actually one of the reasons I like Zoom is I don't feel so badly taking up the time of our department heads week after week after week, although maybe they feel badly, but thank you all for being here again. And do we have anything more? We have one more thing. We were going to talk about the virtual village, right?
We are going to talk, if you would like, we can talk about the virtual village. I think that's a relatively short and fun item and a good way to wrap up the evening.
So you say, village manager. Famous last word.
I'm just putting it out there to the universe. So
it's definitely fun. So let's
fun.
start with that. And maybe we should ask Maddi to kick off that discussion because it was her idea and I love the idea and I'm very excited.
It is, we are definitely handing it over to Maddi Zachacz, who did think of this, and take it away, Maddi.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. This actually came to us from one of our neighboring communities who's doing a similar program, but we know that small businesses are the heart and soul of our village, and we know that most, if not all of them, are struggling right now. Even if they're doing okay from a financial perspective, they are, you know, keeping up with the executive order, same as we are, and trying to pivot in order to accommodate what's required of them, what they're allowed to do, and how they sort of have to change their business models. So we thought that it would be a great idea if the Board of Trustees could work on something with us, with the manager's office, called the Virtual Village Initiative, which would basically be a weekly Zoom call between the mayor, some trustees, a combination thereof, as many as want to join, and set up a Zoom call with one of our local businesses. So hopefully we'd be doing one call a week, and then we could be posting it on YouTube and, you know, with some social media fanfare, and have it be sort of a weekly series. And there are 3 points that we really wanted to hit. So we want to make sure that we have geographic diversity. So, you know, we know we have businesses scattered all over the village. We don't want to focus on any one area in particular. We also want to have diversity of service. So we don't want to have all restaurants or all hardware stores. So we want to make sure that we're offering a broad offering there. And we want to have language diversity. We know that we have plenty of folks in this community where Spanish is their the language that they're most comfortable communicating with. And we want to make sure that that's integrated into this program as well. So basically what it would look like is a call scheduled through the manager's office, coordinating the schedules of the mayor, trustees with the business, and for no longer than 20, 30 minutes, set up a Zoom call where the mayor and the board could ask some introductory questions, have the owner, proprietor introduce themselves, tell everyone where they're located. And then we were really hoping that each business could kind of set themselves apart in a unique way. So a restaurant could do a cooking demo, or, you know, we were thinking some of the hardware stores and things of that nature could do DIY advice, crafts to do with the kids when, you know, you're having a rainy day at home together. So we really want the businesses to be able to strut their stuff. And we think that this would be a great platform for them to do it. We would basically send them an email letting them know what the parameters were, sort of vetting the interview and the demo or what have you with them prior, so there wouldn't be any surprises. And then using GoTV to edit if there were any reason to do any edit on the film. We did ask for a small budget in order to do this project. So GoTV quoted us $100 per episode to do that editing if it in fact was necessary. And so that is sort of the proposal as it stands. I know several of the trustees had some suggestions about businesses that they wanted to participate in the call with, or places in particular that they wanted to make sure weren't missed in this process. So that is the initiative, and I'm open to any questions.
I think it's a great idea. I'm very excited about it. The one thing I've watched now, more or less 4 episodes that were done by our neighbors in Newcastle, and it seems like it's always the same council member in Newcastle who does it. It seems like it's her thing, and what we're suggesting is, and I think it gives more flexibility for us to be able to incorporate people if we can work with, you know, the flexibility or availability of 5 different schedules. And one thing I want to say, you know, you said it could be, you know, any number of us that are participating, but the reality is our role in the way that this is we really just say, we're so excited to be able to celebrate our local businesses. And this week we're going to hear from so-and-so, and then we pretty much turn it over to them. I think there might be you know, it might make sense if in anticipation of it, if Maddi, since you're the leader of this from the government's, the professional staff side, if you and whatever one of the 5 of us is taking the lead on the next one, if we, you know, have a conversation about, well, what are the types of suggestions we have to guide the business, like things that we want to ask them to address, and give them, you know, sort of the outline of the things that we think would be good ideas to include. And they could say, actually, I have these other things I want to talk about, and that's fine. It could be even better. But you know, I don't think it's that much about us so much as us creating the platform and framing the opportunity for the business. And then since we'll be the one who's in the, you know, in the Zoom room with the business, that we can just, you know, have that outline that you and whichever of us on the board is leading that particular week, that we can kind of keep things moving along and make sure we hit those points, or let them go if we've done a good enough job. I think a half an hour is probably too long. I think I would tell them 15 minutes and be fine with it being 20 minutes for what this is. It's not, it is like a mini episode, but you know, even when I watch, you know, binge watch sitcoms on Netflix with my kids, they're like 22 minutes long now. So I don't think asking people to sit and look at a non-professional TV personality for longer than that is going to get us what we want to accomplish. So those are my general reactions, but I've had a lot more time to think about this than my colleagues have, because I've been watching these episodes and thinking about it, and we already have a super long list of suggested businesses. So we will want to get this underway quickly to be able to include as many as possible. Who else has questions and thoughts about how this can be successful?
Although I like the idea a lot. I think that having a set number of questions that you ask every business makes sense, to not only give the audience a sense of what to expect, what kind of information they can get from these videos, but also help structure the conversation for trustees that are less comfortable guiding conversations like this. Because there's certain information that I think would be helpful for people to know. What kind of services are you currently offering? What's the best way to get in touch with you? How are you putting out information? How has COVID impacted the way that you are doing business? What do you want the community to know about the kind of work that you do? Things like that. My sense is that in terms of time, it may make sense to say, you know, every episode will be X amount of time, you know, plus or minus a few minutes. My sense is that there will be some businesses that do a lot of social media, are super comfortable talking about their business, are much more fluent, and you can have a 30-minute, 40-minute conversation with somebody like that. But for somebody that is much less comfortable having conversations, 5 minutes is an eternity and would be sufficient to be like, we're still open, please come visit us and spend money here. Anything else? That's it, we're still open, you know. And it's like, okay, great. So I'm happy varying it depending on the comfortability of the interviewer and the interviewee. And I think that this is one of those things that we can do, get some feedback about what people find valuable of it, and then adjust, as opposed to saying, you know, we're committing ourselves to 3 months of interviews or whatever.
Okay, sounds good.
I would agree with Trustee Lopez. I do think they need to be shorter, because people in this day and age, I mean, 4 minutes on YouTube is forever. So, you know, shorter is better, unless somebody calls you in advance, Maddi, and says, I want to do a cooking demo. It's 22 minutes and 5 minutes for, like, if they have it planned, that would be fine. My concern is success, right? So you always plan for success, never for failure. So let's plan for success. So this is a success, and all 55 retail shops want to do this. Do we have a sense of, is this a forever thing? Is it a COVID-related thing? What is your point of view on this? Like, can you do as many as people want? If every retail establishment in the village of Ossining wants to have their 5 minutes in the sun or 20 minutes in the sun?
I think it sounds like the concept is evolving a little bit. You know, like I said, what I was originally envisioning was, you know, perhaps more than one trustee at a time and it going on for a little bit longer. It sounds as though if it's going to be fewer trustees and a shorter episode, that maybe once we get our sea legs, we could start producing a couple more. The idea was 1 a week for all 13 weeks of summer, but certainly that can be adjusted if it turns out to be a wild success, and the trustees and the mayor are still willing to participate. I don't see any reason why it couldn't go on in perpetuity. I think it's, you know, going to be pretty easy from the production side, as long as we're still operating in this format. So,
yeah. So to that end, I also actually don't think there's an editing need. These are not professional, and they shouldn't look like professional ads. I'm not even sure we should be advertising using public funds anyway. But I think in this day and age with Zoom and all that, you know, I think the fact that it looks like exactly what it is, a conversation, and somebody may say, oh man, I forgot to say this. Let me repeat that. Forget what I just said. You know, we're going to have to do like the village, like let's say logo in the beginning, and at the end we might want to say everybody gets their store and their URL, you know, thank you, like whatever the beginning and the end. I just think quicker is better and simpler is better, and looking, I don't want to say unprofessional, that's not a fair statement.
Polished.
But looking like exactly what it is, a free form, if you will, I think will actually enrich it. And like you said, maybe a couple of times down the road, we'll say, okay, we now know that we need to make it this way or that way. I think that's great. I'm just concerned that you'll be so successful that people want to do this, and more people say, wait, what about me? What about me? You did this dry cleaner, you didn't do my dry cleaning. And this being a project that requires a lot of management, I'm just concerned about it. If you're not concerned, I'm okay. Success is a good thing. But it's always funny when people think about what does success look like and can't answer that. Then, you know, you need to answer that question up front. Will you be able to manage this for 26 weeks with 2 to 3 a week or whatever? I don't think it's the trustees, as Victoria said, is the big issue. There's 5 of us. Somebody will always be available, or you, or Karen. There are enough of us, all of us. That's not the time element issue here.
So just to address 2 of the points that you made. So the first one about the, you know, the wild success. You know, I don't want to overpromise. I think we should get at least 2 or 3 under our belt before we can say for sure that this can go on forever. Like I said, I don't foresee any issues, but you know, I'm not a fortune teller, so we'll see. The second thing is, as far as editing is concerned, I don't think we were looking to do any sort of like special treatments and, you know, make anyone look, you know, very, very buffed or anything like that. I think what we were talking more about was splicing in a screen at the beginning and the end, much like what you had mentioned, the seal of the Village of Ossining, or perhaps like a you know, a colored or a white sheet that gives the name of the business, their address, their social media handles, things like that. I don't know that we have the capacity to do that in-house. We've been, you know, sort of working together over the past couple of weeks to see if that's something that we do have the ability to do without having to turn to GoTV. And certainly if we can do that in-house, I think we'd be happy to.
Great, thank you. So you'll look into it, because you can do it, I mean, you can do it in-house. It's not really that complicated, but, and you guys are smart enough to do it. So, but you'll figure it out after 2 or 3 of these things. Thank you.
One, I think just 2 quick things that I would add are, one, you know, I don't have all the experience in the world, certainly, but I've been having these conversations on my podcast for the last 11 weeks. And sometimes I'll have a conversation for an hour and then it gets edited down to 15 minutes because it takes people some time to get comfortable and you know, so that's something to consider. And number 2 is, I think that Eric Schatz does a really great job in Ossining.com. He has this series of 5 questions where he profiles businesses. I think that's a really great example of exactly what we're talking about. You know, what do you do? Why'd you open a business in Ossining? Da, 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 da. Like that's like the model, and it's short, like that's the kind of thing, but this would be video form. So that's like a good second data point in addition to the Newcastle videos for like the direction that we're going in.
Maddi, thank you so much. It's a great idea, and just let me know what can I do to help. So thank you.
I know you want to be on every single one, so we'll talk.
We'll see.
Hey, I said the same thing. I love this stuff. I have to wait till the hairstylists open up, though, Maddi. I'm sorry. I saw them on Dana's list of next steps, so I'm excited.
So is there anybody else? I have a couple of things I wanted to say. I know I spoke at the beginning of this, which I don't usually do early on, but I did. Does anybody else have any questions before I have a couple of final questions and comments for Maddi, and we tell her to go forth and schedule? Okay. So I think of the question of editing, I see both sides of it. I don't think it needs to be heavily edited, but if like we go to a restaurant, I think we talked about Brothers you know, being somebody that has done little cooking segments on camera, that's something that would be fun. You know, if he drops an egg on the floor and spends 5 minutes like wiping up the egg yolk, I don't think we want that on the video. Like, not that Elmer would ever do that. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have used a real person as an example. But and I also I like the idea of having you know, a standardized set of questions as a starting point, and then we modify it as what makes sense. You know, a restaurant is very different than a sporting goods store, is very different than a yoga studio. Some of them have been operating throughout the last 2 months. Some of them are just now preparing to be able to function in any way, shape, or form. So that would obviously change the tone. Some businesses, you know, they might, like the one that they did on the bookstore in Newcastle. She kind of walked around her store and said, here's some great products for kids this age. Here's a nice little way that I can package something. Here's a good baby gift. And you know, she's just selling things curbside. So that was how, you know, she was sort of demonstrating, if we asked a question like, how have you pivoted to be able to survive during the pandemic? That would be her, you know, a way of answering that question. But I also think that providing these parameters and asking these questions in advance so that they can be prepared. I wouldn't really think of this as, it's not really, at least the ones that we've seen examples of, is less about interviews and more as giving the chapters of what to discuss to the subject, to the business owner. And then we can just be there to interject or to clarify or to enhance something that they're saying, and we may not even be on camera to do that. And we kind of give them just somebody to talk to, so that they're not just talking to a screen. It's really, you know, not to quote Sue Donnelly, but it's not about me, it's about you. It's not about us, it's about you. So it's really not about the elected officials. We're there to, you know, just frame it and say, we want to do what we can to help you because you're such an integral part of our community. And as far as whether or not it's an advertisement, yeah, I mean, I think we do need to frame it in the terms of, you know, our job is to provide the infrastructure for businesses to be successful. In the past, that was like, we thought about sidewalks and flowers and stuff, and now people are trapped in their homes, and so we're finding other ways to provide infrastructure for our local businesses. You know, it's not about having safe, clean sidewalks for people to be able to walk to them. It's about, you know, people even remembering that we have businesses here for them. So I'm really excited about this. I want us to get going on it. I'm comfortable with you know, just moving forward. Maddi, if you want to sort of, you know, clarify what you think those 5 questions would be. I don't know if you have time to be able to do that, circulate it, and if everybody just can quickly take a look and give some feedback on, you know, yeah, that makes sense, or did you think about this, or, you know, maybe this, you know, like give some quick feedback, and then encourage Maddi to start scheduling people. Are we comfortable with that? Oh, and then the only other thing about editing, you talked about having an opening screen and an ending screen. It would be helpful if like the person's name could be on the screen, like while people are watching it, like so-and-so from this business, like have that on the bottom of the screen. So if somebody tunes in 5 minutes into it, they know what they're watching. Oh, and then I know we're going to put this on the Village YouTube channel. I'm sure that Jaime will put it on social media, on Facebook for people to see when it's done. Is this something that can also be on our TV channels as content that Craig could put on TV for the folks who don't spend so much time online?
I don't think that question had come up yet. I don't see why not, but I could certainly speak with him and with the GoTV folks and make sure that aligns with what they're supposed to do with those channels, but I don't see any reason why not.
Great. I think that would bring in another demographic that might not be tuning into YouTube and Facebook, and that might be more willing and interested to sit down for 15 minutes. I'm always surprised at how many people channel surf and land on a village board meeting on TV, and you know, they might have fun landing on a 15-minute segment about a local business. All right, any other thoughts and questions on this? Are we good with the next steps?
Yes.
Awesome.
Great.
Thanks, Maddi.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm excited.
Madam Manager, anything else besides a motion to go into executive session?
We are done.
All right. And can I have a motion to go into executive session for matters related to personnel of a specific persons?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And with that, thank you so much for joining us in our virtual world here. We will see you next week in the same virtual world at 7:30 for our legislative session. We are adjourned to exec. Bye-bye.
Right.